all sides of that.
You guys should sit over here so we can join your party.
You think these are fun? Come to some council meetings.
That's right.
Let's get started. Commissioner Lorky and Commissioner Hamilton called, and they're gonna be joining us late. So, Cora, would you take over the agenda review?
You bet. Your packet's kind of light tonight. We did not get minutes in time to get them posted. We will get them out to you, and they'll be in next month's packet. I did distribute a supplemental packet that includes the commendations and internal affairs cases closed, which also were not done when we originally put the packet together. Apologies for that, but since you're not taking action on those, that's just supplemental information, I was more comfortable giving it to you at the last minute. We'll refrain from giving you anything at the last minute that requires your attention, because we want to give you time to review it. The agenda tonight includes one substantial topic, the domestic violence presentation and discussion with Detective Mel Thompson, and a presentation from the chief on the chief's report. We've given him some additional time because of all of the exciting things that are going on in town. Update on the Downtown Public Safety Zone Forum and committee reports. So that's it.
So with that, I am going to ask for your support to strike agenda number 2 off our agenda, obviously, because we don't have minutes. I'm also going to ask the commission to allow about 5 minutes to include Outreach and Resource Committee to do a quick overview of a meeting from last night. If it's okay with you, I don't think I need a vote, so unless I hear otherwise, a no. Okay?
Good.
All right. And public forum?
I have one speaker in the public forum today, Andrew Ortiz. Miss Ortiz, would you like to, Counselor Ortiz, would you like to join us at the table?
Oh, absolutely, thank you.
Right,
There's
good.
where there's not a commissioner. Nobody cares. Well, thank you for entertaining my request to speak. I will try and keep it short and sweet. I'm coming to you today as a board member of the Kids First organization. It's the forensic center where children who are abused come and do interviews and actual physical examinations by a physician. And we're asking to get on your agenda for about 15-20 minutes in the future as you guys see fit. We're wanting to expand the knowledge base of the community as what Kids First does, and its multi-jurisdictional support that is needed to continue to do its work. Historically, I worked in the emergency room, and I can tell you that back in the day, we used to do the forensic examinations of children in the emergency room, which was not optimal. I would encourage you all, if you are interested, to take a tour of Kids First. I could set that up for you. It is very, it's a very warm, inviting place. Staff is there. Their whole focus is to make the examinations and the interviews as traumatic-free as possible for the children. So I just kind of wanted to give you guys a heads up and a request to get on your agenda. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them, but I don't, I'd like to have staff here and from the Kids First and to do a presentation.
Is that the United Way funded agency?
No, they do not get any. It's a multi-jurisdictional agency, so they get monies from Lane County, and I'm not sure if the city of Eugene puts any dollars in or not. Councilor Clark was actually on the board previous to mine, and it isn't a council assignment. It's just a community that we get involved in.
It's a,
Andrew
if I
Ortiz is
could,
sitting in your seat.
it's a quasi-private, public, combined effort. The Friends of the, used to be called Child Advocacy Center, and now is Kids First, is a quasi public-private in conjunction with the district attorney's office. So there's a number of county budget pieces that come into play, but most of the funding comes from state CAMI funds, which is a dedicated line item out of the state budget. But it also then does some degree of fundraising and gets private donations as well, as it's a private organization. But it functions essentially to coordinate efforts around when kids are abused or hurt, and getting them both the services they need and a more effective prosecution of their cases in a kid-friendly setting to lessen the toll on that kid.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you so much, and I will stay for some of it, but I'm not gonna stay for the whole meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Unless we have other speakers, we don't have anybody else signed up. That concludes our public forum. I'd like to turn the time back over to Juan Carlos.
Thank you, Tamara. So I just needed to remind you, and I should have done it before the public comment. So if you have, commissioners, if you have any feedback of whatever you heard at the items from the commissioners, that would be an opportunity for you to do so. You don't have to, I encourage you to do about whatever you hear from public comment. And that leads to items from the commissioners. How about if I start with you, Kitty, and go this way?
Okay, so what I would say is I think it's pretty obvious, and the chief would certainly support me in this, that Occupy Eugene has kept us all extremely busy lately, so that's, the unanswered homeless issue is still big in our community. We had at our council meeting, we had a good report from the auditor, and out of that conversation, actually, probably you'd be interested in knowing, there emerged quite a discussion about campus police and oversight issue with that, and council has asked for a work session on that. So that's we'll do that. I guess we had the Human Declaration of Human Rights Awards here, and had members of the police department who were Pete Despande was recognized for his work. And as I'm sure you would say, and others, we had a very wonderful Civilian Police Academy that's now reached its finish, and everybody who got to be part of that, I got to be part of it part of the time, but it was very, very good. We appreciate it very much. And I know you're going to talk, Chief, about the Memorial Highway probably during your time, and so and then the only other thing of interest is I had an opportunity to facilitate the ACLU young people's discussion on student rights, and that was a very interesting discussion. And out of that, I would say that the biggest issue that came out of that was bullying in schools, and how to protect people's free speech rights at the same time that you try to deal with the bullying issue. And it's not an easy thing. Within that group, there were kids who were very adamant about free speech rights, and then there was a kid that was like, "What about me? I've experienced this bullying, and it's not so easy to stand up and admit that that's happening to you. And so if you don't have adults who help you do that, how are you going to do it?" So it was a very interesting discussion.
Well, I'll talk about the Citizens Police
Yep,
Academy
please
some
do.
also. As you're talking about the bullying in the schools, we just had our graduation on Tuesday, and we had a session just before our graduation on safer schools, where Officer Zeltbay, I believe is his correct name, came in and presented to us about his experiences in the schools. So that was kind of interesting that you have that conversation the same week or in the same time frame that we did too. But I want to say, great academy. I can't tell you how much we've learned, and how much that will help me make decisions here for the as recommendations for the chief and for the police. This last Saturday, we went through simulations where we got to put a lot of the things that we've learned in class into actual action, where we had to try to make the quick decisions and try to talk to people, talk them down from, somebody that was suicidal, trying to talk them down, and trying to talk to somebody even that had a problem with a dog coming into his yard, and what he was going to take care of it himself, those kind of things. And and the officers did a really good job of acting the parts and really getting in our faces and yelling at us and forcing us to make the quick decisions. Yeah, well, and that happened in some situations. In some situations, it was, we had to shoot. and really showed the quick decisions that the officers have to make. And we didn't have, and I know they didn't run us through the super quick decisions that they have to make, but just the decisions we had to make, in the short time frames, it really shows how quick that they have to make their decisions on limited information, and try to keep the threats to themselves, to any bystanders, and even to the suspect or victims very, very, very good. So I even talk in classes, I would almost recommend that it's mandatory for all police commissioners. It is so good to learn.
And so broad.
And so broad across the whole spectrum. We were talking, and it is a big time commitment, but the knowledge that you gain there from all of the different officers is to me, is very, very important, and will help me make decisions for this commission too. Thank you.
So if you can't do that, at least go on a ride-along, right?
It doesn't give, the ride-alongs are good, but
Yeah.
it doesn't cover everything that
No,
you can learn in
not
this.
at all. Bernadette?
We had no CRB meeting this month, so our next meeting will be on January 10th, which will be a Tuesday, which will be right before this next meeting on the 12th. And we are going to have a case, excessive use of force that is captured on video at the jail. So apparently, I'm going to be watching some movies.
That's your next
in the next
meeting?
movies. Yes. So our meeting will be on the 10th. We won't show the movies at the
Which we'll
videos.
discuss it, but
Yes, so it'll be discussed. If anybody has any questions, let me know.
James?
Mayor, Jim, congratulations on your successful completion of the Citizens Police
We have a
Academy.
diploma.
Yeah, I tell you, I was listening to Jim talk. I kind of flashed back on my residency in the police academy some years ago and stuff. So I know it's very exciting. There's a lot of information that you get at one time, and you can never realize what it is to sit in a classroom versus reality. And the reality and stuff puts you in a totally different light. I appreciate you sharing that with us.
And well, it makes you remember too, the one that I had where they opened the door in what was supposed to be a school, and there were these mannequins of little kids with somebody pointing a gun at them, and I was the police officer, and I closed the door and turned around and said, "What the hell?"
I emptied the whole clip of it.
I don't even want to go, I don't want to go there at all.
I wanted to mention a couple things. I had a lunch the other day with a man and his wife who recently moved here. They have a 16-year-old son who's 6'4", who has autism, and they moved to Eugene because of the services that are available for people with autism here. And they were asking me about stuff that goes on, and the dad was a little bit nervous because his son is such a big guy. And I was really proud to be able to tell him that we have a police department here that's had training, that they've brought Dennis DeBalt over here to train them about characteristics of autism, that they could easily arrange to speak, that he should introduce his son to the guy in the school that he goes to, that all of these different things that I had learned from being part of this group here of how the EPD works to make life better for people who are differently abled. And so that was a real treat for me to be able to share that with this fella. And I also wanted to mention that I was at a Mental Health Advisory Committee meeting at the county, where one of the committee members made a point of telling the interim Human Services Director over there, Karen Gaffney, that about a lot of the good work that the Occupy movement was doing to help homeless and mentally ill and addicted people, and how important they thought it was. And our committee ended up passing a motion to ask Ms. Gaffney to share that information with the city and express our opinion that the Occupy folks should be able to continue camping where they are until we find some alternative way to provide the kind of services that they're managing to provide down there. And I also wanted to mention, I went to the meeting last night that we're going to talk about later with at Centro de Latino Americano about the feedback that we gave them. And there were a lot of good things that came out of the meeting, I think. But I was struck with how, well, 3 of the bunches of recommendations that are on that sheet that you guys forwarded back from the department, three of them specifically mentioned Lupe. And, I don't have any idea what happened to Lupe, but she's not there anymore. And I was really struck with the sense of loss that these folks expressed. The years of trust and knowledge of each other, and the fact that they felt so much more comfortable with her than they did with anybody else. And they were really at a loss as to how that was going to be replaced. And I thought that, Sergeant Braun did a really good job, and Todd, of trying to reassure them. But I was still left with this feeling that they're really, really sad about losing this person, and are feeling kind of alone. So, thanks.
Thank you, Tim. So I want to thank you, the ones that have been going to the Citizen Academy, and for sharing. Every time that you went, you kind of made me continue to live vicariously on your experience. And of course, reminding me of my own experience. I know that Academy is still evolving. They're bringing up some new stuff. And just based on the feedback you were giving us, I was a little bit jealous. But that doesn't mean that I couldn't join in the future again or apply and see if they'll take me again for a second round. But I'm glad you're doing that. And you're right, doing the ride-alongs, it doesn't compare anywhere near the Academy. It really is in depth. There's a lot of resources that go into the Academy. Officers are willing to volunteer. They get paid still, but they still volunteer. And so I'm glad you guys had that experience. And I encourage, especially the new commissioners, to consider going through that. It will give you a different perspective. I would also like to take time to make you aware of a new magazine. It's called Éxito, Success, out in the community. And I'm bringing it up today because one of our commissioners is actually featuring giving some awards, Mayor Piercy, giving some awards to a group called Juventud Faceta out of the Multicultural Center. And so, of course we know that the mayor is out of visible, but reaching out to our Latino youth and keeping them motivated, that is something that it's only scratching the surface. We have to do more. So I say thank you. But also, if you have an interest in kind of knowing a little bit about this ever-growing population, this will be one way. We will have no radio, we have no TV. So for some of you that are venturing into different wonderful areas, this is one way to do that. I've heard some rumors, and I don't know if that's true or not, but hopefully those rumors are going to become true in the future about some kind of Latino Citizen Academy. If that ever happens, boy, that would be a capstone for somebody's legacy. Councilwoman Ortiz, thanks for coming to speak on the public input. Leadership and I will be looking at accommodating that. I didn't hear any opposition, so we will definitely look into accommodating your request. So I have. Tamara?
I just wanted to say how pleased I was to hear that the ride-along program had been resumed, and encourage those of you that haven't had a chance recently to go on a ride-along, and remind you that one of the places you can do a ride-along is at the 911 Communications Center. And that's the most recent one that I did. That is very enlightening and a little bit different than what you might get in a regular ride-along. So I was pleased to hear that that was available again. And then I wanted to also say that hopefully we can fit in the Kid First item that Councilor Ortiz brought to the table. It may fit in with one of our agenda items we already had on the agenda for January. So we'll take a look at that. Thanks.
Bob?
Chairman, thank you. I'd like to echo what was said tonight about the Citizens Police Academy. I did attend that, and it was very, very enlightening about the Eugene police procedures, which are special to the community and important to the members of the community to know about. Done my ride-along with Sean McGann, was very good, enjoyed that, and also in communications ride-along with Steve Peterson, who's retired now. Getting to know the department you work with is important. I think putting a face on the people when we talk rhetorically about what police in general do police, and, you know, we don't put a face with it. Sometimes we tend to go off on a tangent, and it's just good to remember that they all have lives, you know, children, wives at home. We lost another officer today in Virginia Tech and
Yep.
your neighborhood where you used to live, and my wife lived there for many years, and so it's really tough to see the criticism sometimes when, you know, they all have to do their job, and we depend on them for our own safety. So I thank everybody for participating and taking part in whatever you've done to better your understanding about that. I encourage everybody else to do that too. Thank you.
Give up. Jesse?
I was pleased to read this morning about the Occupy Eugene listening sessions that went on. I think that it was a good article to educate about the challenges posed by Occupy and the benefits that it's bringing to the community. So I just want to thank everybody that was involved for doing that. I think it's important for something that's taking so much energy.
Mike?
I appreciated hearing about the opportunities that you faced through the Citizens Police Academy. I was reminded how much I enjoyed and learned in that process. I think you're right that it's something that everyone who serves should do. It gives you a unique perspective, as I mentioned. And one of the things I learned right away, as I was mentioning when I made the crack when Tim spoke, was that that was the last real life scenario that I did up there, was the school-based one. And I went running at that thing and emptied the whole, at the gallon, emptied the whole clip on it. But that was only after I did the first one in the hallway upstairs, where I got dead real quick. And, you know, that was one of those scenarios where, you know, we're trying to learn something from it, but that's what the folks doing this work face every day, and I wouldn't have gone home that night. And so it really affected how I made decisions from there and what I thought about the work that they do. So I think that's one of the only ways you can get any kind of inkling of the challenges that the department faces. I think it's very important to do. I was going to mention one other thing, and now I've forgotten it because I got focused on that. I guess I'll come back to me if I remember it. No, I do remember it. I'm sorry, Andrea. I appreciate you being here with that request. I absolutely support the idea of us having them come in to speak with us, having sat on the board for a few years. The work is critically important, and anything that that we can do to help be supportive, I'm absolutely in favor of.
Thank you, Mike. Caitlin?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Haven't seen you all in a while. Sorry I missed last meeting. It's hard for me to juggle sometimes, so I'm back. Just wanted to update you guys on a couple of things at the university. We've been dealing with some tough situations with our mandatory reporting policy that recently was implemented this year. Now, I don't know if you know that this happened, but before we had a volunteer anonymous reporting method to where if anyone went through a sexual assault, they could choose to fill out an anonymous report and send it in. Now, if anyone goes to a staff member of the university, it's mandatory reporting. The person's name is on the report, and it has to go to DPS, and they can choose not to do an investigation, but it is reported. And so a lot of people have been feeling like survivors' rights are being infringed upon on our school. So that discussion is going on right now. And with the Neighborhood Livability Work Group, we're working on the social host ordinance and getting feedback on that, getting feedback on school from that too. And that's going really well. The two police officers that are working with us have been really great, talking about other communities and what has worked with them and what hasn't, and getting the perspective of the new officer who was put on the party patrol.
Dressler?
Yeah, that has been really good because he can, I don't know, it feels like he can see both sides, so it's really helpful to have him in the room and be an advocate for the safety, but also the students. And then I also want to say thank you to the police department. All I've heard is good feedback from the Occupy Eugene. I've heard just really respectful interactions between the two groups, and it was really nice to see that happening. So that was cool. And that's it. So thank you.
Thank you, Kaylin. So again, I want to chat with leadership about accommodating the request. For our next item on the agenda regarding domestic violence presentation, I'm going to let the chief introduce our guest, Detective Mel Thompson.
Mel, come on up to the table if you would, please. I'd like to introduce you to Detective Mel Thompson, who's been with our department since he began as a reserve police officer in 1993. That's a few years ago. He was hired in 1994, was assigned as a patrol officer, and worked on our street crimes rapid deployment unit. In 2005, Detective Thompson was selected for our violent crimes unit, which is an elite investigative team in our department. And he is currently assigned there and investigates primarily domestic violence cases. He is also on the board of directors for Women's Space. All yours, Mel.
Thank you for inviting me to answer some questions for you, and also thank you for your service to the community. I'm going to start by giving you some numbers that we see nationally for domestic violence. This area mirrors the national trend pretty close. I understand that you probably wanted some statistics for our area. Didn't know where to begin to look for those. Didn't have enough time to get everything. There's so many different ways to look at them. I thought maybe this would be more like a discussion, and I could get a better idea of what exactly you're looking for, and I can get back to you with the information. Just to give you an idea of how big a problem this is, on average, there are 4 domestic violence-related homicides in the country every day. That's between 1,200 and 1,300 people are murdered by their intimate partners, and that number is last reported was in 2007, the statistic for that. Of all the domestic violence incidents, only 70% of it gets reported to the police. And that number is gleaned from the number of contacts the other non-government organizations get, the support groups such as Women's Space. The difference between that, and that just covers the actual reports that would have been criminal behavior and actual assault. That doesn't capture the people who are victimized by economic means or emotionally, things that don't rise to a criminal level for us, that nevertheless seek out services. 1 in 4 women in their lifetime will experience domestic violence. 76% of women who report physical or sexual assault, the perpetrator is their partner in their household. 50% of the males who abuse their intimate partner also abuse their children.
Wow.
So you can see how this problem multiplies out. And then there's the Center for Disease Control has attached a dollar figure to the effects of domestic violence. $5.8 billion with a B per year in health-related costs. And all but $1.6 billion of that is the direct medical costs. The remaining amount is lost productivity, lost wages for the people who are victimized. So that's why it's important that we address this aggressively, which we do here. I'm going to go in now and try to explain the way the domestic violence laws are in the state of Oregon, give you an idea what my day looks like and what an investigation looks like. I encourage you all to ask me questions as we go along, kind of keep me focused on what it is you're looking for, rather than have me just rattle along with what I think is interesting. In Oregon, domestic violence is defined as household or familial violence, and that is people who, related by blood or marriage, have children together, have a past intimate relationship. I don't know if you're all familiar with Oregon state laws on the Abuse Prevention Act. That pretty much dictates arrests in certain incidents. Crime of menacing, when someone intentionally places another person in fear of imminent serious physical injury, that you've menaced them. Of course, assault is self-explanatory, causing physical injury to somebody. And recently, strangulation, and that's impairing the ability for someone to breathe. Those are our three things that if we go to the scene and determine that has occurred, we're required to make an arrest. Also, under domestic violence, we have restraining orders, violation of those orders, harassment, which is offensive contact that up to but just short of an assault. And here in Eugene, we also use domestic violence modifier for any other crime that has that component, such as a burglary, ex-boyfriend breaks into a girlfriend's apartment, that sort of thing. And I've seen reports of criminal mischief or vehicle damage based on relationships that are breaking up that are accompanied with other acts of violence.
You mean they use that as a method of intimidation?
Yeah,
Mhm.
terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
I deal with people who are they feel unsafe in their own home. That's not right.
Do you, you didn't mention emotional abuse. Is that something that's outside of the police world?
Depending on the totality of the circumstances of the situation, we can use that as a piece to go forward with a prosecution or an arrest. But in and of itself, you're not there breaking the state statute, and that's where organizations like Women's Space are very important to provide the support and counseling to help them either remove from the situation or fix it.
Does stalking come into play in any of this?
Yes, stalking is also can be considered domestic violence, although stalking is more of an alternative to a restraining order. Restraining orders are issued for people who have been in some kind of intimate relationship or household. Kind of the same, stalking is the same, but that's just unwanted repeat contact, and that could be anybody. That could be someone who sees you on Facebook and decides they're in love with you. And keeps coming to your house or continues to mail you romantic cards, or it doesn't even have to be of a romantic nature. It can just be that unwanted contact. But there are requirements to arrest people under the stalking ordinances.
Those are both civil remedies as they start, yes?
Stalking, you can go right to criminal. You know, if you're there investigating a crime and have probable cause that occurs, you can go right there. But otherwise, stalking starts as a civil remedy. You would, as a police officer, or just an instrument to give a civil citation, separate the people, and summons them into a court hearing. Here in Lane County, our approach to domestic violence is a multidisciplinary model. We have law enforcement representatives, of course, but also in that group is the district attorney's office, DHS, the Child Protective Services, because under state law, children who are exposed to domestic violence are said to be victims of child abuse. So they fall under the authority of DHS. Parole and probation, they have people dedicated to supervising people who have been convicted of domestic violence related crimes. And of course, Kids First. I've had some of my thunder stolen today. I was going to give you the story on Kids First. And I will add also that they provide an invaluable service, and we couldn't do our job without what we needed to accomplish using their facilities and their expertise.
Do you know,
And-
I'm sorry to interrupt, do you
No,
know
go
a
ahead.
percentage of how many abusers were victims? And is that number being constant over time? Is it going up? Is it going down?
The last number I saw for a period of, I want to say it was 2003 through 2007, I believe that number is 63%.
Of abusers were abused or
Abused.
in domestic violent
Yes.
home when they were kids?
Yes.
And is that number been constant, or is that in?
I just have that one snapshot is
Oh,
all
okay.
I remember looking at. But that's one thing I can add to the list if you'd like.
I'm
Okay.
fine.
Good to know.
Just curious.
write it down, it didn't happen.
I know the feeling.
I think I've heard that somewhere before.
And as far as the team, the biggest player on the team that comes is Oregon Department of Justice. They provide money for research and grants and kind of the movers behind the scenes. And I assume that our policy would be things that you would be interested in. Yes.
Question, one of the states, I believe it was Washington State, during my military tenure, is that if you were convicted, if a person was convicted of domestic violence, that they could not own a firearm.
Just the mere conviction, no, not in Oregon. It can be a stipulation as part of the probation or in the court order. Restraining order is what gives the power to restrict someone's possession of firearms here in Oregon. A valid restraining order that's been contested and upheld by a judge usually has a firearm prohibition in it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Our policy for domestic violence, restraining orders, and stalking it's very simple because it mimics state law. And so our policy is already pre-written. In our, if you had a chance to review that, in our operating manual, the only difference from the state law is where they get into the specifics of what's required of day-to-day operations by the officers and their supervisors. One of the things that we do that's a little extra that I think is very important is that when officers go to the scene of a domestic dispute and they're unable to develop probable cause, but there's been an allegation of a crime, they're required to write a report anyway and document those allegations even though they were unable to prove them. And those turn into gold for me later in my investigations because sooner or later we're going to be able to develop that probable cause and get that case in court. All these other reports that people have taken the time out of their busy day to write a report that wasn't going towards an arrest or any other stat all comes into play, and we can show this is a pattern of abuse. And having one confirmed incident sheds new light on these others, and I've had successful prosecutions going back and bringing these other cases along. So it's an important piece of information in my investigations. What I do is also driven, I mentioned Child Protective Services, with their determination that being exposed to abuse or to domestic violence is a form of child abuse. That sets us into enforcement role, assisting them with the investigations. Our district attorney sets our standards for what they prosecute, gives us advice on where we draw the line. And also, the jail has become involved recently. We had a new law passed, signed in June, and that gives the jail the power to issue no contact orders to these perpetrators when they're booked into jail. Because before, they could be arrested, put in jail, and the first thing they're on the phone, calling home, calling relatives, make her drop the charges and all this stuff. And now that gives us another crime to work with. Once they pick up the phone, they're served their no contact order as soon as they're in. We don't have to worry about them being released without seeing the custody referee and having these conditions placed on them ahead of time so that they can't go back to the house. It really cleans things up for us that way. As the domestic violence investigator in Eugene, there's just one of me. I'll give you an idea what my duties are. I am dedicated to domestic violence for the Eugene Police Department. Then there's 1.5 others. There is one investigator on loan to the district attorney's office for Springfield. His job is exclusively domestic violence with the prosecution team. And then they have another investigator in the office that works 50% of their time on domestic violence issues. The first thing I do is every report that's prepared by patrol that has the domestic violence modifier on comes to me via email. And I read those. So as of the first of this month, I've reviewed 827 domestic violence reports. And that is up slightly from last year. And that includes all the crimes I talked about before, including the violations of restraining orders, because I like to review those because I see familiar names. Cases that I've been involved in the arrest or prosecution, and then afterwards I can see that things still aren't working out for folks, and I can set those aside for special attention. It also gives me an opportunity. I review the domestic dispute reports, and then when I see to start seeing the same name or the same addresses over and over, I can also set those aside for a little special attention and look at them in a new light and see if maybe there's not a way I can make one of those into a case and make this stop. Since child abuse is a mandatory reporting issue, just about every police report of domestic violence we cross-report to DHS, and then we get that back. And then there's also the reports that are made directly to DHS that come into us, and I have to go through and review those as well.
Excuse me. You were saying that you see about 827 so far that on the DV reports.
Yes.
And that was up from last year. What was last year?
This is going to be an educated guess. It's going to be right around 600 through the end of the year.
So about 18%.
Yeah, and that fits also with what I see to the pants feel sitting in the office with working through cases. It seems like we started seeing an increase about midsummer. I don't have any hard numbers to support that, but I started seeing a lot more reports coming through. And then, of course, I'm responsible for additional follow-up from all the investigations from the arrests that patrol makes. I'm at the Kids First Center 3-4 times a week. I monitor the interviews, write a short supplemental report about what the children have said, and send that off to the DA. It's especially critical now with the we used to have a waiver from the defense bar about the requirement for 7 days to go to grand jury from an arrest. It's a state law. They waived that. We lost that. And so it compresses our time frame for having to get our work done. So it's important that I get that information back to the DA. I also review through the reports, look for other witnesses that might not have been contacted, or other areas to look for witnesses to get additional information. I contact victims and get follow-up photographs. We always like to have a couple, 3 days later, photographs of injuries. I won't say they look better, but it's a better representation of what the actual injury is a couple days down the road. Also, sometimes during the course of an investigation, it's not practical for the other officers involved to interview the suspect, so I may go to the jail and take care of that. In instances where the suspect isn't available at the time of the investigation, I help other officers. I have attempt to locates entered in the record, and that is when they're contacted by officers on the street, there'll be a flag in their file that they're a suspect in a case, and then I or the investigating officer will get notified and be able to come out and finish the investigation and determine the case that there wasn't any probable cause or to make the arrest. Of course, all the cases, even if I have no peace in investigating them, any time they go to trial and the district attorney needs any assistance, I'm the person they call, so I spend a lot of time. I have driven victims to court, made sure their children are picked up from school, gathering extra information, you name it, and I've done it for one of our district attorneys. Back to the no contact order, I spent a lot of time at the jail listening to these recorded telephone calls these people make to their friends and family, and this is if we can get a child witness and jail calls, we're about 99% of the way of not going to trial. Those are the two most powerful pieces of evidence that we have to convict these folks. And of course, I provide training and community outreach, and
Detective, I'm just curious, what kind of outreach do you do out in the community?
I come here and talk to you. Other groups call up and want to know what the police do for domestic violence. I can go and talk to them about what it looks like, what it is I do. Sometimes accompany women's space folks to provide the law enforcement side of the outreach that they do.
Are you in schools also?
I have not been in the schools to talk about this, no, and that's a good point.
We're seeing some of that happening in some of the
Yeah,
areas.
our school resource officers have been doing a really good job of tracking down the school rumors and actually getting some reports written after hearing of things that have been going on. So.
I have a question.
Sure.
I was talking with a teacher friend the other day, and she said, she has some kids in her class that there's just something not quite right. It's like they don't show up with bruises, but there's just something about them that you can just kind of sense that, there's just something going on in the home, but the kids aren't talking. And what would you recommend she do in something like that? Because, as a mandatory reporter, she knows all the things to do, but even when there's cases where it's clear that something has happened, the caseload, DHS can't get them out of the home or whatever.
Right.
But what would you recommend she do in something like that, other than, obviously keep watching, but...
I would say to make sure to assure the children that they should feel safe at school. And point out the fact that there's police officers there, and there are other levels of people. Should they want to talk about it, encourage them to talk to a trusted friend as well. And I'm being kind of selfish in saying that, because later on, what is confided in the friend can be used in a prosecution should it go far enough. And also it gives them someone that they feel safe with, and sometimes talking about is all that they need. It may not be something bad, it may be something minor that's caused them to kind of veer off the path. And if it's something really serious, I would hope that the friend then would have the strength to come forward and get them the help that they need to keep them safe.
Tim, I think you were trying to get the question in next.
I was wondering if you, whether it's the seat of your pants or whether it's your database, if you note amongst these domestic violence cases how many of them are military veterans or mental health patients, and how many might be false reports that somebody's just mad at the other person, so they make something up.
I think I'll start at the end and work my way backwards. I think the false reports usually speak for themselves, and those are the ones that I end up seeing as domestic dispute reports. If someone is willing to go to the lengths, I'll make the assumption, to cause injury to themselves and then attribute it to another person. Then I think we're getting into a world where I think that is possible, but I would like to think that that's something that's going to show itself before it gets too far. As far as veterans, I don't have any hard numbers. In fact, unless someone during the course of the investigation makes that statement, it's not really a piece of information that we capture on a regular basis. Mental health consumers, a lot of those reports, when that comes to light, that changes the way the path the case takes through the district attorney's office, and it's more likely to end up having some other resolution that addresses that problem rather than the criminal behavior.
Detective, I know you have more stuff to go through. Let me just empty out the queue, James and then Tamara.
Okay.
First off, thank you so much for the report. I do have a question. When the overall intent would be to keep families together. During the initial intervention in a family domestic call or something like that, or dispute and stuff, are officers armed with pamphlets or something that will give referrals to the family for community mediation, things like that? Women, if it looks like it has gone beyond that, to mediate, to women's place and things like that?
Yes, in fact, there is a requirement in Oregon state law under the Abuse Prevention Act. It dictates part of the language, and you're required to hand out a, we call them purple cards. It's a little trifold purple sheet. It's got district attorney's numbers, it's got victim services numbers, and I'm not sure if we've got women's space number on there yet, but if we can get them to victim services at the DA's office, they are the gatekeeper for everything. The volunteers they have working in there have contacts with every organization you can imagine to get them pointed in the right direction. Also, it gives them information on how to obtain restraining orders. And so, yes, that's something that even on those domestic dispute, the borderline ones, those cards are more important than the other ways, because they're gonna end up in this, when an arrest is made, the victim's gonna end up in contact with those folks anyway.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tamara?
How common is it when there's been a restraining order placed by ex-spouses for the offending spouse that's got the restraining order against them to use the children as a means to access the person that they're not supposed to have contact with?
I see that a lot. It's getting a lot harder to do that. We've got, and it just ran out of my head, Christians for Families. There's some organizations that
Carolyn Rexius, right? Is that,
yeah, there's some organizations that have come together to address just that issue, where you've got volunteers that facilitate the transfer of children in custody issues, so that there need not be any contact anymore, and it removes that excuse. Because it is that desire to maintain the family that gets into these restraining orders, where the children still get to see both parents, and this is a great thing to keep them from having to come face to face.
And how common is it for, or I mean to say, how difficult is it to prove those kind of cases where the intent of the person is to use domestic violence in a way where it's indirect through the children? Because, there's a lot of things that someone can do indirectly that still may, has the same effect on the victim,
Yeah, it
even
keeps
though it's
opening
not
the
direct
scab,
contact.
absolutely.
Yeah. Those seem like they're difficult to prove.
There are some cases where people just cannot get the message, and they continue on, that go on for long term. Moves out of the realm for me criminally, and that's where I count on my partners, Women's Space and the other, to help them come up with plans to protect themselves, safety plan, help them make decisions on what links they want to go to break all contact with folks, and they can help them through that. And it's very difficult, and thankfully that's not something I have to deal with on a daily basis.
Would you take two more people before you continue?
Sure.
Mike and then Kaylin.
Thanks, sir. A few years ago, we had a horrible case where a man who was arrested for domestic violence ended up released from the jail and ended up killing his wife.
Yes.
I don't want to put you in a difficult place to speculate, but with the nature of the increase you've seen in the last year of reports, calls, and incidents, and the nature of the anemic state of our jail, how much more likely are we to see a dangerous situation maybe even occur soon?
Well, that is,
I know it's
we've
speculative.
had more than one of those instances occur, and if you consider all of Blaine County, we've had in the last 18 months, I think there's been 5 domestic violence related, and maybe up to 24 months by now, homicides. That has put a lot of pressure on the jail, because people are making hard decisions based on what resources they have. We've been doing a fantastic job of keeping people locked up that are accused of domestic violence. We've got other violent criminals going free before domestic violence defendants are released.
What type?
We have money that has come into the county that's helping pay for electronic ESP bracelet release, so that even the domestic violence, should they score high enough and in the domestic violence threat assessment that they think they still pose a risk, they can only get out of jail if they're on a bracelet and they're released to a responsible family member. So the issues of people getting out on bail and stuff, that's really been reduced and it's been fantastic. It also helps keeping things moving forward with resolutions in court when they know they're not getting out of jail.
Kayla?
Thanks for coming in today.
You're welcome.
So, do you often see family make reports of other family members that they feel are in domestic abuse situations?
Yeah, that's one of the big ways I get reports.
Okay.
Say that again?
If a family member were to report that another family member they feel is being abused, so if the victim is not willing to go against the perpetrator, what do you do in those situations?
Oh, even patrol deals with instances like that where maybe the victim isn't. There's a lot of emotional and psychological dynamics that go on. They may not be willing to participate at the time. Domestic assault is one of the things that the state will prosecute without a willing victim.
Wow.
So we have to work hard to put together a very strong case, gather as much evidence. Other family members have great information. We can put all that stuff together and we can make it happen without the victim participating at that point.
Okay. And then so sorry for my many questions. So let's say the perpetrator found out that the family were making reports and then went against the family and was threatening them, and the family called the police, and I've heard that there has to be like repeated threats through phone and such. Is that accurate?
There's been an arrest made, the first phone call is enough to get that person arrested for tampering. If there has not been an arrest made, there's still, we fall back into regular laws, the telephonic harassment, menacing, those types of things. And there has to be that documented stop.
Okay. Thank you.
Have cases similar to that all the time.
Thanks.
Guys, let's let Detective Thompson finish up his notes.
So that was covered what it is my responsibilities, and part of that touched on how I get involved in cases. I wanted to go through and give you some of the novel ways that investigations make it to my desk. And I'll start at the bottom because of the ESP release question. Is I have worked with our vice narcotics team, with our property crimes detectives, where they have problem people that in the course of their investigation have determined that they're being abusive to their girlfriend, that sort of thing. And I've worked with them and we've put together a domestic violence case to put them in jail, to hold them, because the crimes that they are investigating won't hold that person in jail for the length of time they need for their investigation. I get direct calls. People call the police department. They don't really want to call 911 because they don't think it's an emergency, and after it filters through the phone tree, it ends up on my desk. Coworkers, family members, people who may or may not be mandatory reporters that don't really want to go all the way through that and just want to let me know that something's going on and have me look. Once again, I can go back to the domestic dispute reports and I can usually find some corroboration of this information I'm getting and initiate an investigation that way. Sometimes the report of abuse goes straight to DHS, and so it's never a police matter until DHS goes out to do an investigation, and the CPS worker will call me and I'll go with them and we'll start our investigation, get the kids interviewed, and the intake comes that way. I get referrals from Women's Space, women who are just looking for some counseling or some support to get out of their situation, establish a level of trust with their advocate at the center, and then decide to report. I go over there and take a lot of reports from people who have changed their mind and decided maybe enforcement is the way to go with it. And then, of course, the patrol officers that get dispatched to these all day long write the reports and go through the review of those. I'm down to the last thing here, just to kind of give you an idea of what a typical investigation looks like. Anything I've glossed over at this point? An easy report would be call comes in, a neighbor's called, or victim is called, or children are called, saying that there's a dispute going on in the house. Patrol officers respond and conduct just a simple investigation. Interview the people involved and determine that an injury has occurred to one of the parties. At that point, then they're mandated, they make the arrest, they arrest the person. They move on in their assignment on patrol, and then the report ends up coming to me the following day. If there are children involved, I contact Kids First, make sure DHS has been routed a copy, contact the family, make sure that interview gets scheduled for the children, get that information to the DA, and that on most basic cases, that kind of ends my involvement. We still have some contact answering questions for the victims and the victim's family. That's just a smooth, easy operation. Cases that come in through other means, where I have to spend some time coaxing people. Usually the longer it takes to get information out of a person is in direct relation to how long the abuse has been going on. I've had one case that took nearly 6 months of my time almost exclusively I had to have a series of conversations with the victim to start getting into the information. And then there was having to go back and rebuild past history where police find out the police have been to their house 9, 10 times in the past. And so there's very labor intensive to go back and collect that information. I mentioned earlier the attempt to locates we put in people's records. Sometimes a case will go out there and no arrest will be made, and it'll just kind of hang out there, and even up to a year later I might get a phone call from our communication center that this person's been stopped in a traffic stop, and then the case takes off again. And I think.
Okay, Tamara?
What percentage of the cases involve women as the perpetrator or the suspect? You know?
87-13, 85-15 ranges in there, and once again, those are from numbers from the mid-2000s, the last I saw, and that would be nationally.
Okay. And what a percentage of the time have you gone through an investigation of a report of domestic violence and found it to be falsely reported? Do you get a lot of, false reports where somebody's got an ulterior motive to reporting that, and you find that there was not actually any, or suspect that there's not any domestic violence that's actually occurred?
It's very rare. I can think of only one incident where I've dealt with that, and I think part of the reason of that is with the state of society with child abuse now, it's easier for them to make some allegation through children. And it's easier to make unsubstantiated complaints. You don't have to worry about having such specific pieces of evidence as you would for a physical assault against the reporter. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Have Tom and then Bob.
I'm intrigued that there's a connection between those two things. That's really interesting. But that's not what I wanted to ask about. You've mentioned a lot of different community organizations that are probably nonprofits.
Yes.
Most of them that you turn to help provide for these victims and their families. Are your efforts to be the enforcement arm limited at all by the limited resources of these nonprofits? In other words, do you see opportunities where they could do an even better job and help reduce your workload in any way? And that's sort of hooked up with the question of what do you know of that's being done because we started off talking about how people that are abused or witness abuse as kids, they could go on to become the victim. Is there anything that you participate in that tries to break that cycle?
Yes. And of course, I have a dog in the fight with Women's Space, of course. They could always use the help. They probably see 5 times the people that actually make it in here, because they're dealing with all of Lane County to begin with, and people are more comfortable going there and not contacting the police. And as true with any other nonprofit right now, trying to do work like that, the money is scarce. Yeah, they could be doing a lot more, especially on the education piece. They have programs for ongoing care after all of the prosecution and arrests are over. That they could do more in the education component to help break that cycle. Absolutely.
Bob, next, and I'm in the queue.
Earlier, there was a mention about a person convicted of domestic violence and possessing a firearm. And forgive me, it's been a while, but wasn't there a federal law that was passed that made it prohibition against owning or carrying or possessing a firearm once you were convicted of a domestic violence assault? Or is that still in effect? I'm just not sure. That's.
The way you're asking me, you're causing me to have some doubt, but I'm not sure that.
Well, I know you're
that's
talking
the
about
case.
Oregon law, but
Yeah.
I just wondered if there's still. It's been a while, so it may have been repealed. As far as I know, had a sunset provision or something. But at some time, there was a federal law that prohibited possession of a firearm when the person was convicted of domestic violence. Because there was some argument about soldiers carrying weapons once they were convicted of assaulting their spouse, or the same thing with police officers.
Yeah, I know with the restraining order, that's an issue
Right,
here in
that's
Oregon.
now, yeah.
And even in law enforcement, it's
Right.
a huge issue with that.
I have a couple of questions. One is directly about you as an officer doing that job, and the other one is about community. The first one is, what has changed for you as an officer? I know Chief Kearns was, when he introduced you, you've been around since 93 and 94, and after a few years, on the job, what's changed for you as an officer that you think either you're doing different or otherwise?
I know.
I find I still have the passion for the job, maybe not the enthusiasm I had when I was younger. In fact, this particular position I'm in right now helps me maintain that. Something I very strong feelings about domestic violence on a personal level. And then, of course, and I hesitate to say this, like when I came to work here, I listened to the old timers walk around and say, "Oh, they've taken away all our tools and all the laws are changed and we can't do our job anymore." And I find myself having those same thoughts sometimes. No different than looking in the mirror and seeing my father, I suppose.
That happens, doesn't it?
It's hard to hear.
But I think for the most part, I think things have stayed the same. I may have changed, mellowed, have a different outlook on life. But I'm still surrounded by good people that are enthusiastic to do their job, and it reminds me why I started to do this.
Thank you for the delivery of that first question. The second one should be easy.
I'm sorry, refresh my memory on the second one.
I haven't asked that yet.
Oh.
So, So, I mean, I don't have to tell you this, but there are some communities out there that they're not as comfortable reporting domestic abuse. And it may not just be people of or different kind of socioeconomic status, but also maybe, for example, folks in the Latino community, even some people that I know in the Asian community and African American community. What new ways have you identified that may be getting to getting more comfortable to in fact come forward? And I mean that because there are some families that the potential for more trouble may be there, or they don't even know where to start. So I was wondering if you know any new ways that you've started.
I think our education outreach, counting on our partner nonprofits to get the word out. I know Women's Space has Latina support, and we probably are very weak on support for other communities. And it's for a lot of things, it's a question I struggle with, just about people's fear to come to the police to ask for help. I have to keep reminding myself after being on the inside for so long that well, people get scared just being around people in uniform. I'm one of them. And so remind myself that I don't know that I have an answer to your question about how to make that better, except for to provide services in a manner that looks appealing and makes a person feel comfortable enough to talk about it.
No, you did answer both of my questions, and thank you. I have next Jim, followed by Bernadette.
I'm assuming that there are some cases of perhaps minor children abusing their parents.
Yes.
How are those treated any differently?
Of course, they're handled
I'm
through
sure
the
they
juvenile
are, but-
system, so there is a difference. There's still the arrest made to separate the folks and make sure that the immediate safety is established. Also, that incident then would be the gateway into offering services to the family as a whole to address those issues. And that's one of the unfortunate things, the way we seem to be set up these days, is that for them to be knowing they're having problems and seeing these problems coming down the road, to go out into the community and try to find someone to help them beforehand,
It's hard.
it's very difficult. It could be very expensive. They may not have the resources to do that. But there's plenty of help that's available to folks after the fact. And it's another concern I have, and then I don't have a good answer for fixing that.
Thank you.
Have next Bernadette, followed by Jesse.
When, part of it's kind of a comment, I think when you were asking about what's changed, when Mel first started, most of the complaints that got filed were victim-driven. That if the victim didn't follow through with the DA's office to prosecute, then a lot of times, 9 out of 10, they wouldn't get prosecuted. They had to show up at the DA's office for an interview for the misdemeanor assaults. And so that was a huge change when you started going to, non-victim, the victims don't have to be cooperative, and pushing it through. And I think at the same time, when you first started, same-sex partnerships did not qualify as domestic violence.
Not yet. That's been in my career span, yes.
Yeah. And then I guess to get Linda, now that she's here, into it, what have we seen because parole and probation supervising misdemeanor domestic violence? I mean, those are the only misdemeanors that parole and probation supervises, isn't it? Or domestic violence, or for the most part, because they're not.
Domestic violence and some sex offender misdemeanor, but we're not to supervise misdemeanor because we're not funded. We do it as a courtesy to the courts, and that's an important thing for the safety of the community and the victims.
Because it hasn't always been that way, that domestic violence misdemeanors were supervised. They were mostly just court probations for.
Right. Some counties don't supervise them at all.
And have we seen the probationers becoming more successful as a result of them being supervised as opposed to just on a court
To be honest, I have no sympathy for DV, so I can't look in that area. I can't speak. I'm sex crime. I have.
Oh, okay.
That's one area I do not do well and would never want to supervise.
But maybe you can answer the question. I mean,
Personal.
do you see that
childhood, I would
having
be the
parole and probation
better.
services supervise the domestic violence misdemeanors as opposed to the court?
Oh, absolutely. Because that gives, maybe not ongoing, you know, from just that fact, but it definitely exerts more pressure on them should we come looking for them again. I think, behavior-wise, it probably changes them.
So what would be the next big step? I mean, if the victim's not needing to be involved to prosecute was a huge step, and then supervised probation was a huge step. I mean, what do you see as the next big step that we need to take to break the cycle, so when those, the boys are seeing the abusive boyfriend and beating up mom, and then they kind of go, oh, I can do that, and start beating up their sister, because that's what boys do. Boys get to beat up the girls. I mean, what's the next step to
I think we're still struggling against the change from what goes on in my house is my property and my business. I think we're still changing from that. I think we need to get to the point where intuitively any child looks at that and knows that it's wrong. And they know absolutely that was wrong. I need to tell somebody and get help right now, instead of like, oh, well, Dad did it, it must be okay. I think we keep working towards that point. And I think we get there through education. And thanks for reminding me. I forgot to big shout out for the district attorney's office, that even in these lean times, they still manage 3.5 dedicated prosecutors for domestic violence. And they've got 3 very aggressive people, and it's a lot of fun to work with them because they don't like it either, and they go after it.
Up next, Jesse, followed by Kitty.
I think one thing that might keep people from calling is this kind of approach that guarantees that there's going to be an arrest, and in order that splits apart the family for a certain amount of time. In cases when you've not got a chronic issue, I'm sure that you have heard many times somebody say, if I knew this was what was going to happen, I would not have called. And I think that, I guess in Juan Carlos's question made me want to make the comment that I'm not advocating any sort of policy change or anything, but one issue that needs to be considered is that there will be that guaranteed time when somebody's going to have to be arrested, there will be a no contact order, and you've got a family that has no intention of splitting apart after this is done, but they're struggling financially, and now they're maintaining have to maintain 2 different households, and it completely changes the way the family was. That affects how people report once they know that that's what's going to happen.
That is true in some cases, that a lot of the times, we will hear from victims that they didn't initially report because of that. And it's an imperfect system. But ignoring the problem and not making those decisions to remove a violent element from a family setting, I think outweighs that. And that with the education, the progress we've made with the reports, there are other people out there that know what's going on. And I like to believe that we're going to hear about it, even if the victim doesn't make the call. As far as the hardship on the family, My fallback stance to that is that at that point, if for whatever reason, without establishing any blame on why the decision is made, I have to become concerned with the well-being of any children that are in that household. And we have to keep the violent element out until they can get to a position in their lives that they're able to reunite.
I have next Katie, followed by Tamara.
So we were talking about the Civilian Police Academy and all the things that are part of that, and that just sort of made, I was whispering to Jim there, it made me, I think one of the things we know that in super stressful jobs, which police have, sometimes there, at least historically, have been domestic violence issues within police forces.
We're no different than anybody else.
So my question was, was it really about whether there's any element of that in the training program that tries to get out in front of that and talk about it with people ahead of time?
I know in my group I was hired with, those were things
You talked about.
that were talked about, and I think in more of a big picture thing, 'cause the stress that this job, you'll end up being a 10-year cop
Mm-hmm.
and be off doing something else
Mhm.
because it'll get to the point where you can't control it,
Mm-hmm.
and it will eat you up.
Do you have anything to add?
Well, I'm sorry, I was listening to something else and didn't hear the whole question. Well,
My question was just in terms of the training in the police academy and and my knowledge that at least in the past, there were some higher preponderance of domestic violence within police because of the stress of the job and other related things. And I just wondered if that was part of the training program. So that's what I.
The studies that we've shared in in-service training show that it has less to do with the stress of the job than it does the personalities that are attracted to the job. And the percentages are low for any profession, but in the categories of professions where domestic violence occurs, there are a few that are higher than others: the military, police, ministries, and some others that escape me right now.
It's more about control.
I think so, yeah.
I was just curious about how you dealt with that and talking about it with when you're bringing officers on.
Well, we have, as part of our, we haven't provided the training for a while, but as part of our new policy that we adopted some time ago to address domestic violence among police, we had some training awareness training as much as anything else. And then the basic academy, Scott could probably speak to this better than I can, provides some stress awareness and how to manage stress.
Yeah, it's just one of the things that can be an issue that's stress related. And in addition to what the chief's mentioned, some of the stuff that Mel's talked about experiencing, we talk a lot about dealing with stress in general and dealing with the way the negative aspects of the job affect the way that you look at things and how that can impact decision making in a wide range, that just being one of them. And then of course we have a variety of support available, everything from peer support to informal mentoring that happens among coworkers and supervisors, and then also of course the formal directions and employee assistance programs as well.
And if I can comment a little bit, some of the things that I think Lieutenant Philmont was in the session where he talked about some of the things that you stress as balance is to take the time off. I know you talked about how you worked like a year and a half or 2 years before you took a vacation, and that you took 2 weeks, I believe, in one stretch, and that's what they really want you to do because that allows you to decompress.
Yeah.
But to keep that balance in your life, everybody handles it differently, as you talked about, and some home issues. If you have somebody at home that can't handle maybe some of the things that the officers talk about and they have to go through, because they do need to, I think, release at some point, that they have friends that they can release that to. But or a lot of times they can speak with somebody. I'm not talking about violent release. I'm talking about being able to talk about what happens at work. As most of us don't have jobs like the police have, where they're not always seeing the best side of people, and they need some kind of release a lot of times for that. And whether it's friends or whether it's family, who they can talk to about that for that release, and to keep that balance in your life so you're not taking the bad parts home with you all the time.
I thought that was actually one of the best. I really enjoyed that in the academy. That whole sort of conversation about how you manage your job and manage your life, and and try to keep yourself from getting in bad places. I thought it was really a helpful conversation.
Did they get the Kevin Gilmartin summary?
Yes, the
Oh, okay.
abbreviated version, yeah.
Yeah, there's this condition in law enforcement. It's probably with a lot of exciting professions where, first of all, it isn't necessarily the job that causes the negative stress. The work itself is exciting, but management, creates a lot of unpleasant stress. It's a reality.
People love the job, and I'm not speaking as a union president. People love the job. But it's usually, and this isn't in every, I'm not a attorney.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll just finish this thought if you don't mind. It's the the administration of the department creates a lot of stress for people, and but one of the factors that Kevin Gilmartin talks about is how the excitement of the job causes a person to go out above and below the norms of the emotional condition. So there's this excitement, and then the opposite end of that, which is depression and that sort of thing, which happens in a normal cycle with normal people. But officers will work overtime, will work a lot of overtime, partly because they want the money, but also because the work is interesting and exciting, and so they never have a chance to find that balance. Except for this, the generation that we're hiring today, who we can't get to work overtime very much. They do when they're drafted, but they don't work the football games. Mel does. He's not a member of the generation that we're hiring right now. They,
Sorry, Mel.
Dad in the mirror.
Yeah, exactly. So that balance for Mel and me and Scott, we're not as good at it as this younger generation, which is very good at it. It's kind of an impressive change.
Jim and Chief Kearns, thank you for adding to the question that Kitty Piercy had. Tamara?
Did you want to finish your thought of it?
I just admire you for saying that. As a chief of a department here and coming up the ranks, I admire you for saying that, because that's what I was going to say. A lot of people like the job, but it's usually the administration sometimes that they let the stress. You got to teach them how to survive administration. And once they can survive administration, and that's not in every department, and it's not everywhere, but police officers, I think they love their job. And being married to one, we don't talk about work at home. We don't take it home. We don't discuss anything about work at home. Every now and then something may come up, run into a coworker or something, but you have to leave it at work.
Go ahead, Tamara.
So, you talked a little bit about keeping families together, but also keeping violence out of the home. So I was curious about, is a conviction of domestic violence between spouses, even when there's children in the home, even if there's no allegation of violence against, against the children, and there's no evidence of that, how often is the convicted offender kept away from the children anyway? I mean, to keep violence out of the home, or how often is contact still facilitated, maybe through supervised visitation?
That's up to the individual worker for Child Protective Services when they're making their threat evaluations. I would imagine that you would see if everyone's going along with the program, once they get into the required counseling sessions, somewhere right around there is when you start seeing people back together again, living as a family unit.
That's actually part of the juvenile court orders, because if the mother won't help with the prosecution, she has the possibility of losing custody of the kids because she is staying in a violent home, which is a detriment to the children. So it's not just that one of them is the abuser, the person who's being abused is not protecting the children either by getting out of the situation or doing things to stay away from the abuser. That's an allegation in lots of DHS cases.
I see. Thank you.
I'm next in the queue. I want to say thank you again for all the information. I was going to save this question for the next follow-up. We're going to do a follow-up in about a month or two. because we're hoping to maybe see what other questions maybe were generated today, and maybe ask Detective Thompson to come back with some of that. But if you were to get X to do your job better or get to more families or whatever, what would you think that'd be? Whether it's resources or, I see that you're operating with 2.5 people, and you have 827 reports that you have for so far this year.
In a vacuum, if you were to look at wanting to address the domestic violence problem in Eugene, I could keep another investigator busy with me. I would be required to engage in much fewer cases of triage or things that could be worked aren't getting worked. And that's just from an enforcement end of it. I would like to see more money for schools to make these types of things part of the curriculum. I mean, we should be giving children this information. We should still be teaching them how to drive. Yeah. We should still be giving them these types of things so that they can make informed decisions.
I want to thank you for the liberty of asking those kind of, maybe hopefully not out of the ballpark questions. Anybody else have any more questions for Detective Thompson?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
We're gonna go on break early. How about coming back at 7:25? Okay? All right.
Long break.
Please.
That's why it's important for us to talk to people.
All right, next we have on our agenda the chief's report. He's gonna use a PowerPoint. So I will ask that you hold your questions until he's done. Unless you really have to get the question in, and then please, but let's make sure that he gets his report in, and then I'll be happy to keep a queue. Okay? Chief?
I'm just gonna show you a couple slides from last month's presentation because since Mel talked about it, you're gonna see that the numbers are a little bit different. But we have seen an increase in assaults, a 9% increase in assaults in 2011 so far. These were through September, and that trend isn't changing in October. And then the next slide shows a consistency with what Mel is seeing when he's counting all his reports. See, these numbers don't add up to the 800 and some figure that he's using, but then these are only assaults. They don't include strangulation and menacing and domestic violence that don't amount to crimes. But you see that in single-family residences, we've seen a 14% increase in assaults, 21% apartments and condominiums. I'm not going to count this, the numbers are too small. So for some reason, assaults, probably domestic violence, is going up this last year. And now for this month's slideshow. I thought I'd give you a little bit of a presentation on Occupy Eugene. You know, the city council is going to consider whether or not to extend the exemption that expires on December 15th, and they'll have that conversation during a work session on Monday, December 12th, this coming Monday, but won't take action. Hopefully will take action at the end of the public hearing at the 7:30 portion of the city council meeting. What you see here is just some recent photographs of the camp. This is the front along 6th Avenue. There's an entrance here, and then there's another entrance a little further east of that. This structure here is the built-in kitchen, and this is a storage trailer that they have, and there's about 200 tents there. It's hard to know how many people are staying in the camp. It's somewhere between 50 and 200 people that spend the night there. It's very hard to tell. We get one figure from one group, another figure from another, and police officers can't really tell by walking through because so many people are either in tents or gone during the day.
Gone during the day? Oh, sorry.
We don't know if the people who are there during the day are the same people that are staying there at night, or they're gone at night. But there is a sizable homeless population, and that group consists of sort of the feral youth, the homeless youth that are there, who don't normally receive services from organizations in Lane County. And then there are people who are chronically inebriated, drug addicted, or those who suffer from severe mental health disorders, who also don't receive much in the way of social services in Central Lane County. And then there's another group that does take advantage of those services. And what we've seen so far, or what we're hearing from service organizations like the Mission, White Bird, Food for Lane County, and others, is that there is the same level of demand on their services as there were before there's an Occupy camp here that's feeding something like 600 to 900 people a day, 300 meals, 200 to 300 meals at a meal. So what one could conclude from that is that the homeless who are in this camp are homeless who are not normally using the services that are available. So this is just that population that's out there living among us, but for one reason or another, not using those services. The kitchen here had a problem that somebody in the camp had pirated electricity from the city. I think they got it from the automatic watering system. They ran electricity to the kitchen, and the exposed wires were close to propane tanks and gas cans, that sort of thing. This was included in, this was discovered when, as a result of citizen complaints, some of our inspectors from planning and development went through. They didn't go through and look under every tarp and look under every cloth, but when they were trying to understand what the situation related to the citizen complaint, they saw these obvious things. The Occupy representatives immediately disconnected the electricity and have separated the other dangers that were in there, the propane from the gasoline from the open flame and that sort of thing. And they've, you can't say that it would pass any permitting. I don't know if it would or not, but we know that it's safe enough. Lane County Public Health has also gone through the camp and they're making observations. If there are reports to local hospitals diagnose certain contagious diseases, they're required to notify Lane County Public Health. The last time I spoke with someone from that organization, they said they hadn't received any reports like that. When police officers go through, in almost every case, they can smell somebody smoking marijuana. There's often, particularly in the evenings and in the early mornings, litter throughout the camp and open containers, or people can be seen with open containers of alcohol, which aren't allowed there. And on virtually every visit, when the weather turned cold, there have been open fires, warming fires, which aren't allowed. And we ask them to put them out, they do, and then when we leave, they start them back up again. Our relationship with the Occupy Eugene representatives has been pretty good and collaborative. We tell them we see a problem, they work to address it. They have trained peacekeepers who are every imaginable type of character that stays in the camp. There are people who are mainstream protesters, and there are also people who've spent years as homeless. And there's a lot of touching and impressive stories of people who, given a purpose, have done something meaningful in the camp. It's also a dangerous environment at times, because among the folks that are living in close proximity are people who suffer from severe mental health conditions, who don't manage their behavior well, and then people who are chronically inebriated and drug addicted. Peacekeepers have been in physically violent confrontations. I spoke with one woman who said that she'd been knocked unconscious a day or two earlier by a person, and we've heard similar stories to that. It's just a very interesting thing that we have in our community here, and it's a very challenging problem for us, or decision for us to determine whether or not this is a good thing for them a situation for this camp to be in or not. What else can I tell you? I have personally been impressed that we've been able to put this many people of so many different traits in a small space, and it's worked out as well as it has. And at the same time, I'll tell you that there are a lot of people wearing knives openly in the camp, and we don't know how many firearms are in there. I don't know that we've ever seen anybody with a firearm, but we'd be foolish to think that there wasn't one in there. We don't know what's in the tents. I think it's a kind of a dangerous situation for our officers to walk through at night. Behavior is managed much better during the day than at night. So I'm worried about the safety of our officers, and I'm worried about the safety of the people that live there. I think it's also accurate to say that some of the things that are occurring in the camp, the drug use, alcohol abuse, would be happening anyway. There's a first aid tent and a triage tent there, so if someone suffers a health condition or an injury, they could be treated right away there. That's not typical. We don't have first aid tents on riverbanks and under bridges. So it's just a remarkable phenomenon that we're experiencing in America. I think there's about 350 of these across the United States right now. The experience in something like 68% of the communities are similar to ours. They're peaceful. They work hard for them to be peaceful. And yet communities are fiercely divided about whether or not they should be present. So our experience is like what most of America is having. The stories we read about in the paper from Oakland, for instance, are not the norm. Those are abnormal. Okay. I kind of talked about what a lot of the issues are. I think you all know the story that the camp started downtown and moved to Alton Baker, and then university property along the mill race, and then to Washington Jefferson Park. I have met together with the city manager and our police liaisons several times with representatives from the Occupy Eugene group. We can't engage in our traditional negotiation methods with them because nobody's authorized to make any decisions for them. All their decisions are made by this 100% consensus process. They have meetings, General Assembly meetings that will go on for hours. They've gone as long as 6 hours in order to arrive at some decisions. So you just can't negotiate with that. You know, it's all so much depends on the will of the group. Okay. The food is that they consume there is donated. The portable toilets are paid for through donations. The city has paid for the fence, but otherwise it's not self-sufficient. It has been funded by donations, not by the city. Okay, and these are the costs we had at the time that we took these, we gathered these, which was in November. Most of this $72,000 is police overtime, and most of that came from the initial march in October. I think it was October 15th or so. Mm-hmm. And then when they moved to different sites, we stayed with them because we didn't know the character of the group well enough to know whether or not we need to be prepared for anything else, so that cost a few bucks. And then the bank protests required quite a deal of overtime, and then the Black Friday protests, we had to be prepared for things to happen there. And we did make one arrest and responded to a number of retail establishments. Chain link fence was erected along 6th Avenue because people from the camp were just wandering without looking in either direction, just wandering into 7th Avenue. So they saw 7-Eleven, and so they would just go there. And they would be people who were drunk or not in control of their faculties for one reason or another. It was very dangerous. And we were all concerned that somebody was going to be killed on 7th Avenue. So we had the fence put up in such a way that people would be disinclined to try and cross there. That's worked well, but it's been damaged a few times and had to have been repaired, which is why instead of $2,000 rental, it's $7,200 for repairs and rental. And then for our police officers and firefighters and EMTs, the Occupy encampment isn't consuming a large part of their job. Our detectives are still doing what they normally do. Our patrol officers, for the most part, are doing what they normally do. It has consumed a great deal of the time of our managers, not our sergeants, but our lieutenants and captains and myself, because there are so many contingencies that we have to plan for. So the logistics of getting ready for all that has been very time-consuming for us. A number of entities asked to know whether or not the camp has affected our calls for service. I don't have a very good answer to that. We don't know really. And I'll explain that here in a second. Occupy, representative from Occupy Eugene asked for these numbers. I think the Eugene Weekly asked for them, the Register Guard, and the City Council. So what you see here is a breakdown of calls for service during this period of when the Occupy has occurred here, October 15th through November 30th. And it's localized to downtown and the Washington Jefferson Park. Our calls for service are up, I want to say about 13% this year so far anyway. Some of that is because crime has gone up, and the rest of it is because our officers are working even harder this year than they were last year. So it includes self-initiated activity. If you look at our calls for service in the West University neighborhood, you see that they go up during the school year. That has something to do with the calls we receive, but but it is more significantly affected by the number of citations our officers choose to issue while they're over there working on overtime. Well, this is another example of that. In 2008, this was, I think, the first year that Chief Lehner used overtime dollars to staff up for enforcement downtown and in the parks, so officer-initiated activity went up downtown and in the park. See this? And then we got more aggressive with our staffing downtown in 2011, and our self-initiated activity calls for service went up in downtown and also in the park, as you can see. I think one of the reasons that this number is higher in 2011 than it was in 2008 is because every time an officer checks out to walk through the camp, that's noted as a call, so that would probably account for that. So the Occupy encampment is creating more work for patrol. I don't know that it's significant, though. Anyway, so the numbers are bigger. How much is the camp influencing that? I don't know. Thanks. And these are the fire calls for service downtown. They're lower than last year. In the park, they're twice as many, but these are pretty small figures. Total calls, see, it's very similar to the breakout that we saw in just the police calls. And the fire department, the medic units will not go into the camp without us. I believe that's the case. Did you know, Scott?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, our medic units will not go into the park without police assistance, so we're responding together there, so I would expect their calls to go up too. You want to talk about that before I go on to the hotspot maps?
Yes.
Do you have questions? Okay, do you want to do a cue?
Absolutely. All right, let's work. Tamara?
How many times a day do the officers walk through?
It depends on their availability, but it could be as many as half a dozen and as few as one or two in a 24-hour period.
Bernadette, then Linda and Mike.
The attaching to the electricity, do we have any idea what the cost of that theft would have been?
No.
Because we don't know how many days it was or anything like that.
No.
Okay.
Uh,
Do we know if there are children under the age of 18 there?
Yes, there are.
About how many?
I don't know how many, but probably 20 or so at any given time.
Do we know if DHS has had to respond to any reports of children being around drug activity or any other activity?
We notified DHS very early on that there were, the homeless youth were staying there. I don't know if they've responded to any investigations like that.
Okay, and I guess when this first started, it seemed like on the news, most of the stuff coming out of Occupy Wall Street, out of New York, was, protests, and you would see the people protesting. Are many of them becoming similar to ours visually, in the sense that, when I go by there, there is no similarity between the Occupy Eugene here to what I see on the news and other places of people standing or marching or chanting or anything of that nature. Are they becoming like ours and I just don't know that, or is ours at some time like ours and I just never happen to be by when they're doing that? Just curious.
I think probably that the last.
That there is some marching and chanting at some point in time. I just don't happen to see it.
That's right, but it isn't frequent. The first march attracted about 1,500 to 2,000 people, which is remarkable. I don't remember the last time we've seen that many. Maybe 2003, before we entered the war in Iraq. And then there's been a few marches since then. When the camp was in Alton Baker Park, they held signs along the Fair Street Bridge.
I saw those.
And when they first moved into this park, there was some of that, but not as much. And they've had a number of events, one here at City Hall after Black Friday, I think, and others like that. And I think our experience with homeless people moving into the camp is also typical. That's the norm. Of other cities, yeah. And the homeless people, there's no 100% rule here that applies, but many of the homeless who are in the camp, who have no previous apparent experience as protesters, are now protesters. They are in the camp not just to live there, but to live there and protest, you know, the conditions that the 99% is communicating about. But then there are, just as well, there are those who are opportunists and are living there because it's safer than wherever they were before, and there's food and medical care and so on.
Next, Linda, then followed by Mike.
I think at the last Police Commission meeting, I brought up the question of what happens come December the 15th when they want to extend or want more. And I think we're approaching that. And, you know, as I learned that we're not having a homeless connection in this community because of lack of funds or whatever. When we did have the homeless connection, it provided service to, it made service available for homeless community, everyone. It was more inclusive. And yet we don't have money for that, but the city have money for Occupy Eugene. Or maybe I shouldn't say the city have money for it. Maybe I should say the taxpayers have money for Occupy Eugene. I'm not sure. Maybe I should say the taxpayers. And we're funding Occupy Eugene, and I'm a little concerned. We're coming up on the 15th, and they're going to ask for extension or whatnot. And to me, that Occupy is, I'd rather we try to be inclusive of the homeless and provide the service at the Homeless Connection in Occupy Eugene. And the concern I have with Occupy Eugene right now is that we have provided them a place in the community to camp, and they're comfortable. And when people's comfortable and it's winter and they get meals and whatnot, I'm not sure they want to move or go anywhere else. They're settled in right now in the cold winter. The other thing is, I have sex offenders out there, and I know there's minors out there. I know there's kids out there. I know there's sex offenders out there, and we have to get permission to go out and check them. And so far, none of those permissions have been approved due to
Permission from whom?
our department, supervisors or whoever.
Your department?
Yes, for a PO to go out there when we have parolees and probationers out there. And my concern of having a sex offender out there who was, before Occupy Eugene got there, was under the Jefferson Washington Bridge. He was homeless, and that's where he lived, and that's where he's registered. And now Occupy showed up there, and so he's in the group with Occupy. And that's a concern for me that, you know, we, again, as taxpayers, whoever providing money to, not that we're supporting that, but I have a concern with sex offenders being there and minors being there. It is a dangerous situation, and I just wonder, I really wonder if the city council really gonna extend it, because as my personal opinion of living in this city, the city council will approve them to be extended there. And we gotta be, you know, we have to look out for the welfare of our community as a whole, and the safety of our community as a whole. And I think it's time that we say, thank you, Occupy Eugene. We provided all we can provide, and I don't know what else we can give you. I don't think we can answer all your questions or provide what it is you're looking for. We're not the big corporates or whatever. I really don't know, but I would hope that we can come to some resolution and look out for the welfare of those young kids out there, because I don't think if they're out there with adults that they're being closely supervised. And the homeless youth out there, a lot of time they just end up being connected with the wrong people.
Chief, do you have anything to comment on that, or do you go to next?
I didn't hear a question, so I.
That's what I was saying. Mike?
The only thing I'd say is, I'm sure everything you said is accurate. The youth would be out there with those people anyway. I'm not, believe me, I don't endorse this. I'm just saying this is a very interesting conversation to have, because there's balance from almost every side.
Thank you, Chief. Mike?
My concern has always been throughout this process, equal enforcement of law. If I yanked the cover off a street light and started using power into my house, there's a chance at least that I'd probably get fined for that, if not cited in some fashion. And I'm wondering, did you issue any citations to anyone for having done that?
No, the Planning and Development Department dealt with that mostly as a safety concern.
But not as a theft?
No, we didn't investigate a theft.
And to take off on what both of these ladies said, last week you arrested a woman in Albertson's parking lot on Coburg who had a 4-year-old and an 18-month-old that she left in her car for 12 minutes while it was cold on the charge of child endangerment, which, okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense to me. I'm not as concerned with the issue of addressing people over the age of 15 or people over, but I know for a fact certain, for example, that there was a young lady that came to our last council meeting and talked about her 4-year-old being at camp. So I'm wondering why it is that if we're arresting someone for child endangerment for leaving their kids out in the cold for 12 minutes in the parking lot, we're not doing so for having young kids in that camp.
I don't know about that case. I'm not aware of children under the age of 11 who are there and not accompanied by an adult. It could be that that's true, and if it is, we should investigate it.
If there is an adult with a young child at the camp, are they not, by definition, endangering that child or keeping them out in the sub-freezing temperatures?
Not necessarily.
Again, I guess that's an editorial comment on my part, that I find that disequal enforcement troubling. And I'm not saying that.
No, I know.
It has the appearance of not being treated as others might.
And the reason that we conduct the patrols through there is so that we can fairly enforce the law. But it is awkward because of all the circumstances around it. But if we see somebody drinking, we write them a citation. We see somebody smoking pot, they get a citation. If we respond to an assault, they're arrested. If there's a willing victim.
And lastly then, I noted in a report that I read that there was a rumor in the camp of the issue of tuberculosis, and the response was that there had not been a report of such to public health, but are they actively involved in the process to determine if there are communicable diseases there, or are they waiting for some outside agency to report to them before they do?
They receive information when that happens.
So they're not actively investigating to determine?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
They have gone through the camp, but I don't know of that.
Okay.
And I don't think that's in their protocol to do that kind of work.
Thanks, Chief.
Next I have Tim, followed by James.
Thanks. I kind of think of the Occupy thing with all of the homeless people kind of moving in there as a subdivision, as a new subdivision in town with less attractive houses. And if we thought about it of that way, here's a new part of town. Do we ever think about, well, that's a taxpayer waste of money to go provide public safety services to this new part of town? I don't think we ever do that. I think we just figure that, people are living there now, and it's part of our job as the community to protect them the same way that we would anybody else in town. And so if you have identified a place in town, for example, where I used to live, there was a public housing project that was always a problem. Police were there more frequently there than any other place. So if this was something that was going to be there for a long time, you guys would develop some process where to respond to calls in there or to meet the need of services in there. In a permanent subdivision that moved in, you guys would adjust your beats and all that stuff to serve that. So, and you would contact the people that were new in the neighborhood, have your prevention officer go talk to them and say, hi, I'm the prevention officer, these are the things we got going on. Are those kind of things happening with you and with the police department and Occupy? Or anything like that? Or do you think anything like that would make it easier for you guys to do your jobs in that area?
Yeah, we have a police liaison on duty, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And their job is to receive the reports from police and other departments in the city and talk with the Occupy Eugene representatives and ask them to address the problems that we're finding.
Okay.
So that is happening every day.
Good, good. And one thing else I wanted to mention, that when I was a younger fella, I was sitting in my car in a mall parking lot listening to the radio while my wife was shopping, and I witnessed a 9-year-old boy who was in the car just the next row or so over, who started the thing up and popped it into gear and slammed on the gas and drove out of his parking space and smashed into the car parked behind him and jumped out of the car and running around in circles yelling, "Help, help, help." And that's why, one of the reasons why that thing that you mentioned is a big deal. It's, that's a big deal to leave kids alone in the car with no adult. And, I know some of the people that are down there in the Occupy thing. And the people that I know that are down there aren't alcoholics or drug addicts, though there are certainly those guys down there. But people that I know there are good people with good hearts who are trying to draw attention to the vast inequality and wealth that exists in our country, and they were joined by all of these people that are the ultimate victims of that inequality of wealth. How many of those people need mental health services that nobody has the money to give them? And yet at the same time that they're all hanging out there where they can't even light a fire on a night like this to keep warm, how many of those people would be helped with a little money? And at the same time, I'm listening to the news this morning, and a baseball player is getting $25 million a year. He's a great baseball player, I suppose, but this does kind of make the guys at the bottom wonder, what did I do? What did I do so bad that I get nothing and that guy gets all of that? And that's the place in the heart where these guys are coming from. And, to give them crap because they borrowed electricity for a couple of days just pales in priorities, it seems to me.
Thank you, Tim. I have 4 more people in the queue. I will ask you to have questions for the chief. Next, James, followed by Bob.
This is a very interesting subject. I think that initially when this thing started off, Occupy the movement and stuff, it did have some substance, although there was never, to me, revealed that there was a leader who was leading this effort. That means that people would just congregate and decide that they would throw up shammy towns and stuff and say that under their guidance that we're part of the 99%ers and we're going to stay here and protest. I am really concerned about the location of this camp based on the fact is that as I drive sometimes and it's dark going down 6th Street, that area there is very poorly lit. I've seen people standing out on a curve which may dart out at any moment, and before you know, we have an injury. I've seen that. I slow down as much as possible, but others continue to go by, drive as usual. It is a very dangerous location. I think that with crime erupt in there, that it loses what it was intended to be. When you have pedophiles that are congregating with children, and you have drug addiction, alcoholism, and then you kind of point up saying that we're part of the 99%ers, I think it is a false sent message. I think that the organizers need to recognize that, and then they need to come to the city council and say that what we had intended to do has evolved into something that we don't intend for it to be. I received an email yesterday informing, and probably something I developed old timers in my age and stuff, and it is a medically proven fact that you deal with memory, that the police commission is to hold a public forum on Occupy Eugene, or something like that. I question that. Why would the police commission hold any kind of forum on that when this issue here is directly in the lap of the city council. The police commission cannot do any, we are an advisory board. What are we gonna listen to that the city council has not already heard? What are we gonna say any different? I think it would be, I don't think that it falls up under us. I think that since the city council has been dealing with this all along and they have the authority to do this, why are the police commission being involved, period?
Okay, I am going to ask the rest of you to have questions or keep it very brief because we're going to be running out of time. Commissioner Manning, we are going to have a public forum on the downtown exclusion zone. I am not aware of any Occupy Eugene forum of any kind for the police commission, so I don't think I would want to support that because that's not the purview of the police commission. So I want to rest assured of that. I'm going to take myself out of the queue. I have next Bob.
Thank you, Chief. We just touched on one of the issues I was going to question you on. Is the Washington Jefferson Park in the downtown public safety zone?
No.
The second question is, I think would be naive to believe that patrol all by itself is going to handle every situation that comes up. You have to plan and without getting into tactically to prepare for these types of demonstrations where people chain themselves to doors or want to create a little havoc to bring attention to their issues. What other facets of the police department are involved and how does that impact their operation when they have to stop what they're doing to be on standby and with their uniforms to be ready for any contingencies, which you can't predict? I mean, obviously you have to be ready for them. So, and how often does this happen?
For the N-17 bank protest, we had our detectives answer calls for service while patrol dealt with the protesters. And of course, our communications section is set up, has added dispatchers when we've had the initial march, the bank protest, and then I believe also for the Black Friday protests.
Are there other aspects of the department that are losing time toward their projects or toward their workload?
The school resource team helped with the protest, and the downtown bike team helped with one.
Okay.
And then, you know, there's administration.
Right.
Virtually every part of the department has contributed.
Thank you.
I have next Kaylin, followed by Jess, and the last person, Tamara.
Thank you. Chief, are you going to put a spending cap on what you're willing to spend on supporting Occupy?
I won't. As long as we have that camp there, then the police department will spend whatever it needs to keep it safe.
So if it's there for a year, it will continue?
If that's what the city council chose to do.
Okay. And then I have a question for the chair. When would be an appropriate time to make a motion to discuss this further?
You can do it now.
I'm trying not to waste the chief's time. Is it okay if we do that after the report?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank
as
you.
long as we have the table to vote on that.
Okay, thank you.
You're done with your questions?
Yeah.
Next is Jesse.
I'll pass.
Tamara.
I just was curious, so Chief, when you were talking, I heard you talking about open fires, drugs, open containers that have been observed by police officers, police department employees in the parks. Outside of Occupy Eugene, when those situations are encountered in our public parks, normally, what's the course of action that the department takes with those situations? Because what I heard you say is, you know, if there's an illegal fire, they tell them to put it out, but then they light it again. And if that same situation occurred in a different public park with different players, what would be the course of action of the department? Or if drug use was observed, or if open containers were observed? It seems like these folks are sort of getting a pass, whereas what I guess I'm asking is, would the same pass be given to folks, different folks, or the same folks in a different situation in a public park?
We are issuing citations for smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol and having open containers. And and for the other calls for service that I've mentioned. We haven't issued any citations for the open warming fires. And in other places, we would. We might issue warnings and ask them to put it out. It depends on the circumstances. So we're trying to work with the situation that, that our community's been dealt with, and to apply the law fairly, and also to collaborate with the organizers. So it's not going to be perfectly equal, but it never is. But we are holding people accountable where we can.
Thanks, that was my question.
Last person, you passed, right? So before we go into any possible motion, let me tell you what's ahead of us at this point. The chief hasn't really quite finished with his report. We have the committee reports, which we have one that perhaps Commissioner Manning will be brief, and the other one from Commissioner Walker. So if you are wanting to extend the time, then you need to vote on that now. But those items on the agenda will have to be taken care of. How would you like to proceed? Caitlin?
I move to open the agenda and add a closing discussion on Occupy Eugene after update on downtown public safety zone.
You have to add time to it.
15 minutes.
Second.
Those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
I'm sorry, I need to have a discussion, I'm sorry. Discussion on the motion? Tiamer?
I'm open to that. I may need to leave before that's over because I have a commitment, but I'd like to see how, we may end up not going over our time too much if we are quicker with these other items that are left on our agenda.
I also would like to put myself in the queue. I welcome, and I'm glad that you brought it up. It seems to me that quickly the interest rose more than I expected. But I also like to kind of keep us in mind what is the goal of the discussion. It is about safety, it is about what's missing, whatever that might be. But any kind of motion, we have to have something that is connected to the police commission. Otherwise, a conversation about the Occupy Eugene, but that really might belong away from the police commission. Anybody else have any discussion on the motion?
Did you restate the motion?
She
Who made-
doesn't say,
she did.
Are you talking about the motion to open the agenda or the motion I'm going to bring up later?
She wants to have another 15 minutes to talk
Oh, yeah.
about this, and because she said she had a motion.
But yeah, I haven't stated it yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you like to restate the motion?
Her motion right now is just to add the
Yeah.
15
Add the
minutes.
time.
Yeah.
And Linda got that clarified.
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna call for a vote. Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
No.
No.
Still carries. Okay, so, Chief, how much longer will you need for finish up?
I could probably do this in 90 seconds
Okay.
if you like.
All right.
Not moving on.
Okay,
Can you see?
why don't you go ahead and go to the next slide. All right. What you see in this slide is where the concentration of car clouts, thefts from vehicles, that's the green square, concentration of burglaries, or the blue squares, and then the stolen vehicles. And we have patterns of stolen vehicles that run along major arteries, as you can see here. And then the concentration of burglaries is in the densely populated places like West University neighborhood. Otherwise, they're a little diverse. This is what we'd call a hot spot. The sad news is that there are, for the same period this year, there are more burglaries and more thefts from vehicles. So we're probably going to exceed last year's crime trend. And with these maps, we just started doing this week. With these maps, we've included computer-aided dispatch calls for service that are probably the crimes that we track. For instance, someone will call the communications center and say, my car was broken into. The call taker will give them an incident number and say, you still need to talk to a police officer who has to take a report, and they'll get to you within 24 hours. They don't answer our calls when we call them back because the caller got what they needed. They got that incident number for their insurance policy. We need to talk with them so we can complete a police report so that our crime rates are accurate. So our crime rates for thefts from autos are actually very low relative to what the real crime is. So for our mapping, we've included those calls anyway, even though a report hasn't been taken, and that's new just this week. And what you see is a higher concentration in some neighborhoods of thefts from vehicles. That's what this shows. And there is a hot spot in Beat 4, which is southwest Eugene, and another one here. And a couple of things that are coming up. This Saturday at 11 a.m. out at Willamette High School, there will be a ceremony for the Chris Kilcullen Memorial Highway. The Department of Transportation will erect the signs before the ceremony, but cover them with cloth, and then when the ceremony is over, cloth will be removed. We already talked about what will happen on the 12th, and then we have one police captain vacancy. I anticipate one or two more in the next year as people become eligible for retirement. So we'll be having a process here, hopefully that is complete before the spring. And that's it. The other things I'd tell you is that I had about 13 community events that I participated in. One was the same night as the Citizen Police Academy graduation. I wasn't there because I was at the National Association for the Mentally Ill. Have I got that right, Mayor? NAMI? Okay. And they awarded posthumously the Bill Olhorn Award to Officer Kilcullen for his work with people who suffer from mental health conditions.
Your replacement did quite well.
Good.
Thank you, Chief, for the report and for your willingness to answer and entertain questions and comments from the commissioners. Commissioner Manning, are you?
Yes, who's retiring?
Well, they'd probably rather I didn't say, but
Oh,
they'll
okay.
probably,
Okay.
they aren't publicizing it. I anticipate a couple more.
Okay.
But, Rex Barong is an acting captain. Steve Swenson retired this year already.
Ah,
So that's
okay.
one vacancy there.
Let's quickly take care of the two committees. I think they're going to be brief, and then we'll dive into the discussion that is pending. Commissioner Manager, are you ready?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. As a follow-up to the work that the Outreach Committee has done in regards to the closure or the pending closure of the Whitaker Street Station, which we were asked to communicate and go out and do listening sessions to find out feedback of what types of services the residents in that area would need. The 13 recommendations that was forwarded and approved by the council and EPD got involved with the 13 recommendations, and they did something that was above and beyond what my expectations, and that means that they had addressed and sought out answers for each one of the 13 recommendations. Last night we met Sergeant Barone, Tom Snyder, Commissioner Mueller, and Commissioner Valle. Myself and Carter were all there at Central Latino Americano, where we went for the express purpose after being invited to inform them as to what the findings were, the recommendations. And it turned out to be a very interesting session. Some things came out, and the real opportunity there was to enhance or better the relationship. There were some parts and stuff that they had questions about that we had no answers, personnel issues and stuff. But our focus was on how we can improve the relationship within that community. There were suggestions that some of the things efforts that EPD is doing as far as trying to add more diversity to the police department, in the forms of some of the language identifiers, which are add additional monetary incentives, and also was put out that if there's a member in the community that is interested in joining EPD, certainly this would be an opportunity. And Sergeant Baran, she extended the olive branch and everything else. There were some other things that came out. We didn't take notes of this because it was just an exchange session here. And perhaps it might have been better that we didn't take notes because there were some things that said, and don't want to undermine the relationship of trying to build a trust there. So all in all, I think it was a good opportunity to provide some feedback, But more importantly, I think that we may have had the opportunity to open up some doors, at least get some discussion generated, and perhaps we will start being able to have a little bit more feedback as to some of the requirements or some of the things that they need to make things a lot easier and enhance the relationship between EPD and the community itself. I want to thank Commissioner Valle, Commissioner Mueller, Sergeant Baran, and of course Tom Snyder. Carter is always exceptional, and it turned out to be a nice. I walked away feeling pretty good about it. So I hope that any other commissioners have any comments that follow up on that.
Tim, you have anything?
Well, I do like to throw in to sort of reiterate what I said at the beginning, that, I mean, to try to imagine the situation. We're in a room there's about this many people in the room, and Todd is sitting over there, and this woman is talking about missing Lupe, and she's looking over at Todd kind of with her eyes downcast, and she said, well, no disrespect, Todd, but, you're not Lupe, and it was really pretty poignant, and it lasted throughout the whole meeting, and then another young woman talked about the immigration thing, and how so many of the people there are afraid because they're Hispanic looking, I guess they're afraid of the police. They're afraid of the police. And they don't see the difference between the EPD and the immigration guys. It seemed to me that there was an opportunity for the EPD to seeking a better relationship with the Hispanic community to do more to separate the immigration authorities from the police department, because they're afraid to call you guys because they're going to get kicked out of the country, or their wife will get kicked out of the country. And she mentioned a little anecdote about one father who had 2 little kids, and suddenly his wife was gone because she got a traffic stop. I don't remember what the reason was, but so there were a lot of fear there. And but one positive thing that came out of it, it's a concrete thing, was that they asked Todd if there wouldn't be a possibility that he could be at a place until it's closed at Monroe, pick a certain time of the week, Wednesday morning, for example, where he was going to be there, so that those folks at Central Latino could say, okay, we want you to talk to Todd, we know he's going to be there Wednesday, so we'll go over there with you. So that was a positive communication between them, and I think it was a real good start of building relationship up with Todd, and he was real responsive and recognized that it was going to be a climb to get back there. But it was clearly, the police department was clearly saying, we want to, and the chairman over here was desperately trying to recruit anyone in the room there to join the EPD. That was kind of fun. So it was a sad but positive meeting.
I just have one more comment to add. One of the signs that I know that we have a good chair of that Outreach and Research Committee is not because James is there, but because he is saying, here are the issues, where is the area that we can start to begin to work on this? And I really appreciated that. Last night, there was at least 2 opportunities as such for EPD to entertain, and they both were offered at the table. And one by Todd Snyder to have some reserve time so that they can reach out to and know that somebody's going to be there. And the other one's about a project that you already previewed about schools project. So sometimes you don't expect to have those kind of opportunities in one night, but yet they are. In the essences, they're small, but they will begin some of the process to fulfill the goal of this commission, which is helping better improve the relationship between EPD and the community. So from that sense, James, thank you for your leadership. I do have a couple of folks on the queue, Linda and Tamara.
Go, Tamara. You can take me out the queue.
Tamara?
I just wanted to commend the Public Outreach Committee. I'm very pleased to see that they got an invitation back to a group, and I think it's important when we're doing public outreach that if a group that's participated in that so chooses that we close the loop, so to speak, and that's what happened in that case. And I hope that some of the other groups that we've reached out to asking if they would like to have a revisit for closure will take advantage of it as well, but that's a really positive outcome, and I think that's good work.
Thank you, James. Linda, you want
I'm gonna have to come back in the queue. Listening to what Tamara
said, was some of those group the business peoples or the neighborhood association?
Yeah, some were
You're talking
neighborhood
about?
associations. The businesses never, I think we reached out to them initially and they never invited us to a group, so.
But I know we met with some neighborhood.
Yeah.
And you're asking that because this group went back to Central Latino. And that's the only one they went back to.
We extended an invitation to all the groups we initially met with to come and give them, Carter sent the information, but then she offered for all the groups for us to go back and have a conversation with them, and I think that's the first group that's taken us up on it. Is that right?
Excuse me, we're not done. We will continue to extend our invitation to go back and explain what the feedback was from EPD. That's my understanding, is that correct?
That is correct, and not only that is that when the beat captains are going out into the community and stuff, then we've asked them if we could partner up with them and go out to the different communities as well. So we're looking for every opportunity we can to go back and kind of close the loop as to what the committee was doing and their findings and talk about things like that. In addition, last night, I forgot to mention that we've also been a part, I've participated in, Ms. Hamilton also participated in a gang awareness that the chief was presented to some members of the African American communities and stuff. I shared that with Central to kind of dispel the myth about gangs, what gangs look like, profiling of gang members and things like that. And typically, if you're in an urban area, then you think of one gang and then you automatically relate it to a particular class of folks, and it's not here in Eugene. I also asked them that if they would like to have a presentation on that so that they can become more educated and aware on that, then just let us know too. I don't think that there would be a problem in taking that to that community.
Thank you, James, for the report and for your flexibility to be added late in the agenda. Bob, are you ready for your report?
I am. I had one comment, and that was regards to the problem that Tim mentioned about the police being perceived as part of the immigration process. I was privileged enough to be involved with Mano a Mano in La Comunidad for quite a while, and we went to a lot of citizen groups at churches and around. And I know that each time Lieutenant Mozan and Kevin and some of the other police officers that spoke to the group in Spanish, all mentioned the law in Eugene that does not allow the police to, cooperate with the immigration authorities. In other words, saying, look, we not only do we not report, but we're not allowed to report your status as an immigrant. We're not even allowed to ask. So, we're here to help you. So I hope that theme continues with Kevin and with Todd and the rest of the community that works with them, so they understand it, has to assuage their fears. And that was my comment on it. So the Policy Screening and Resource Committee has, Policy Screening Committee, it mixed my committees up here, has met, and we have looked at the pursuit policy. We have agreed to adopt the policy after discussing it at our meeting and getting through the questions. And thanks to Lieutenant Feldman putting us through the high points and guiding us through what they meant and what each procedure involved in the new policy. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to notice it for the meeting today, so we'll have to wait till next month to make the report to accept the committee's recommendation.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Thank you for your report. Now we can open up the discussion for Chief.
If I could just say one thing for a couple of seconds. The problem, the reason the police aren't trusted is partly because there's a misunderstanding about whether or not we are immigration officers. That's a small part of it. The larger part, though, is that whether we like it or not, or whether we want to or not, the police are part of the immigration enforcement, because we arrest people, put them in jail, and the immigration authority scans those files to know whether or not they're there. So the immigrant community is well aware of that. We arrest somebody from that population who is not documented, they realize that they will be deported, and the police are the link between them being with their family and the deportation.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
imply
I know.
only arrests. I meant in the daily interactions with people where no arrest is involved. They fear contact with the police because they fear they might be asked their immigration status and reported. So, yeah, the arrests are the arrests. They are what they are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
On a given day, I'm given the opportunity, a wonderful opportunity to wear a few hats out in the community. Last night, I was literally wearing the board president's hat as Centro Latinoamericano and the chair of this police commission. Sometimes it's not easy to distinguish the two and try to separate the two. I've done, hopefully, a good job in doing that. But every once in a while, when it does come to knocking to these doors, I sometimes cannot help but to make some comments. And the comments are that I see the interest of the police department to improve relationships with the Latino community specifically. But there's also a lot of challenges. There are things happening because we hear directly from families. Whether we have an interest to kind of look at each case and see where the misunderstanding, where an opportunity for training might be, but that will be up to EPD, and that will be up to continuing the conversation. And as it relates to specific policies, which is something that I will want to continue to contemplate when I'm at this table, then I will be willing to work on that as well. Linda, you want to say one more thing before we get into the Occupy Eugene conversation?
I have a point of order.
To finish our agenda, go back to the end.
I just wanted to clarify, you said last night you was wearing two hats. Your Central Latino president and your police commissioner? You were wearing two hats last night, you said.
Well, I was only wearing the police commission hat, but I was there also, and I needed to provide some background what needed to be. Yes. The meeting was not a public meeting. It was asked to not be a public meeting. Therefore, I thought that I can take that kind of liberty to do so. If it was a public meeting, I would have only been wearing police commissioner. So thanks for asking that.
Another thing is, I know that I took myself out of the queue because the discussions, every time the word immigration come up, that's another sort of sore conversation to have around the table. And I often ask myself, what makes us different here in America than if we were in Japan or China or Africa, or, just other countries where we can't have that same leverage, or we can't have that same freedom. I often ask myself, why is that such an issue here? Why is immigration such an issue here when there are laws around immigration? There are laws around a lot of things, but sometimes we tend to want to, I don't know if not follow the law or bend the law or make exceptions of the law, but it doesn't work for everybody. If the law doesn't apply to everybody, it shouldn't apply to anybody. Or portions of people. I often ask myself that, and I listen to what the chief said, I listen to what you said. We try to accommodate, we try to work, but why is that an issue when it comes to immigration? That seemed like a conversation that's very difficult to have.
Thank you for your comments. Tamara was kind enough to bring me into a point of order. We need to finish up our agenda before we add into the conversation. The update on downtown public safety public forum. Carter, are you?
Too bad. I was just making notes. Report is nearly done on the downtown public safety zone. That is the 20-block area in the downtown area where if people have certain offenses, they can be excluded from the area for a 90-day or 1 year period. And that will expire in April if it is not extended. And the police commission was asked to host a forum to get input on that issue. And that forum, given the date when the council is expected to have a public hearing and when the police commission meetings are, is next Wednesday night. So next Wednesday in this room is the public forum. It's wrote a public news release, went out yesterday, sent it to all of the contacts that I have, asked them to send it to people they know. It's been in the Chamber of Commerce weekly newsletter encouraging people to show up, the downtown chamber. I will send a copy of the press release tomorrow in my weekly email, and if you know of anyone, send it out. It is a relatively short timeline, and I've had a phone conversation with staff from the ACLU who said the community is aware of the issue, and give them the opportunity and they will come speak. Not that I want to rest on that, but I think that we will get good people coming. The report will have some charts, some data, and probably not everything that we should eventually have, because it was a relatively short timeline for us to pull that together as well. And it'll be more complete as it goes down the process to the city council for their work session, and their council hearing is scheduled for the February council public hearing date, which I can't remember right now. And that's it.
December 14th, next Wednesday.
It is next Wednesday. That is December 14th, 5:30 in this room.
Are we gonna
Any-
be, we gonna be at the table like this, or are we gonna be, how is that gonna set up?
Great question.
You should open it up.
I think we should open it up. That's what I was gonna say.
Excuse me, let me step in. So Carter just explained more or less what the format is going to be. He's going to have a background history of the downtown exclusion zone, and then the bulk of the time will be to get, in fact, input. So perhaps we may just have some chairs around here and have everyone who wants to come in. That's what we're going to be doing. This is not going to be this format. That's not going to happen this way. It's really not conducive to the type of input that we're seeking. And by the way, the input we're going to get is going to go right to the people that are asking for it. I will hope and expect that we get a copy of the feedback, and whatever is going to go to the city council as far as follow-up, that we should get a copy of that. I have Tamara, and then you, Caitlin.
Oh, it wasn't on this subject. I wanted to be.
Another thing? Okay.
The next
Caitlin?
Sorry, I just want to clarify. Are we all supposed to go to that next Wednesday?
If you can.
Okay.
You don't have to.
Okay.
Well, I've already put you down, so
Next Wednesday when? I'm sorry.
the 14th.
No, 5:30. Thank you.
5:30.
Okay, thanks.
Nobody in the queue? Okay. Correct?
I just wanted to follow up and say that the tentative plan is to have a discussion about that at the next commission meeting in January. The commission will have time to have that conversation, see all the feedback that is given. So if you can't make it, you'll be able to both see the information that is provided at the public forum, as well as add more, because you all are members of the public as well. And then that plus what is collected at the public forum will be all forwarded to the city council.
Kitty?
Next item.
Same. Okay, and then the next one is going to be first. Wait. Okay, we got all the agenda done. Now we're going to dive into the next one. We're going to be in the queue. Tamara, you're going first, and then Caitlin.
Kitty.
Okay, I'm sorry. So you were for the previous one, so Tamara, and then Kitty, and Bernadette.
I just want to give her time to get her motion out, and then I want to be in the queue to just respond.
Where do you have a motion?
Pulling my trick, are you? Jumping in line?
Okay, I'll just say what I want to say. Does that work? Okay. So, I think the police commission should make an opinion on whether to recommend to the city council of whether the date should be extended or not. I think given the extensive amount of resources and personnel and the impact on our community and the police department, I feel like it is pertinent that we say how we feel about this extension. So I would like to move to recommend that the city council not extend the December 15th deadline for Occupy Eugene.
I second that.
It's a motion and second discussion. Tamara? And Kitty?
I guess for me, I hopefully will be able to stay to vote on the motion, but unfortunately I have a situation where I have to pick up my son before he's at somebody else's house. I think that if we're gonna have an ordinance on the city books, not to allow camping in public parks, that we shouldn't have camping in public parks, or the ordinance should be repealed. I don't think that we should have, I am fully supportive of people in our country who want to exercise their right a freedom of speech and protest whatever they want. I'm 100% behind that. It's one of the things that makes our country great, that folks are allowed to do that and they're free to do that. But I don't think that they should be allowed to violate laws in order to do that. And if we have an ordinance against camping, and there's a reason for that ordinance to be in place because of all the things that we've sort of heard that are not good about the Occupy Eugene movement, the safety, the health, crime concentrated, then I think that the ordinance needs to be enforced. So unless it's going to be enforced, it should be repealed as a city ordinance. If the city council is going to vote to have that continue. I think it is an unsafe situation. I think that it's commendable in this community how well the department has worked and the city leaders have worked with the Occupy folks, and the Occupy folks have worked with the same. But I think that it's just a matter of time before something really bad happens. When you have that kind of a mix of folks and that kind of an area and things hidden and unsafe structures and children and crime and mental health issues and drinking and drugs, it's just a matter of time before something happens, especially in a really busy area of the city like that. And before that happens, I would support having that discontinued. I'm going to have to go, so I'm going to say one thing that's not about that. In regard to Officer Kilcullen, I had occasion to be at the Springfield Parade last week, and they had his truck there with the community hero sign on the side, and his wife and his children in the truck. So I don't know how many of you went to that, but I didn't know that was going to be in the parade, so I was pleased to see that. Thanks for letting me say that.
Thank
that
you,
wasn't
Tamara.
part of the motion.
That's okay. Katie, you're next.
So I just want to go through a few things here. One is that the ordinance, the camping ban ordinance we have has within it legally a waiver, which is for the council to choose to exercise for special events for limited periods of time. And so the language that's being used about it not being applied legally is not accurate. It is being applied legally and according to the law. So just want to make that clear. And then I feel that everyone around here has their rights to agree with Occupy Eugene or Occupy Wall Street or whatever. Everybody's welcome to have their perspective. I think but separating that from your perspective about the camping site is an important thing to do, and to not mix the two. And I'd also point out to you, and I think the chief has already done that most of the expenses are not about the site, they are about the demonstrations, and the demonstrations would have happened anyway without the site. So you have that expense anyway. Those are, part of that is part of the cost of doing business with freedom of speech issues and demonstrations, and when that goes over the line and gets into civil disobedience, then that's when law enforcement takes place and says you have to pay the cost for going past what the law says you can do. So I just wanted to make that clear. And then I wanted to say that the advice that the chief city manager gave council was that we had a high interest in trying to manage what was a national series of events and in our community, and trying to keep the peace without costing the taxpayers a lot of money. And every effort has been to do both of those things. I also want to make sure that you understand that even though council exercised a waiver till the 15th of December, even within that waiver, the city manager was given the power, if he thought at any time there was a health or life endangerment issue, he could move without permission of council. So that has already been given him as his power if he sees things that he thinks are not manageable or too awful to happen. I think that's an accurate description, right? And then I would say that in my opinion, I can't prejudge what the council's going to do on Monday at all. I think the opinions on council are as varied as the community and as strongly held as the community. But I do think I can say with some safety that I don't think that anyone around the table, at the council table, thinks Washington Jefferson is going to be a permanent camping site. The question is, and it's a very complex one, and that's why I question whether you want to get into the mix of it or not, is that it's a matter of when it ends and what the transition is and what the future is for what they're doing. And it's very complex, very difficult. We're all working on it minute by minute. I just question whether that's something you should be engaging in. Taxpayers are supporting it, and taxpayers are opposing it, and that's just the notion. That's the way it is. I think the question for one of the big deals for council, and I think it's everybody, is that we are vexed by the notion of sending people that have come out of the bushes and the riversides and the underpasses who haven't been receiving services and just saying, sorry, party's over, goodbye. So there is an urgent sense of responsibility about what our duties are. And we do understand there are safety and health issues, and they were there before. I would clearly say for the last 20 years I've been continually vexed by the homeless youth at intersection with predators and other kinds of terrible behavior things. So it's not a new thing. It's only being brought more to the surface and to the light for us. The homeless issue of the people that we're talking about at that camp right now, I will tell you that before Occupy Eugene came, we were hearing from parks all over this city. We were hearing from neighborhoods all over the city because we saw the numbers of homeless people growing larger and larger, and the impacts on our communities of people saying that they were feeling those impacts. So even before this surfaced in the way that it has, we have this as a community issue and a community problem, and this is just highlighting and exacerbating it. In terms of the Project Homeless Connect, the reason that the Human Services Commission made a decision that they couldn't do it anymore is, number one, with the very limited resources they had to question whether doing something for one day instead of many days was the best use of the dollars we have available to us. No matter how good it is, and we loved it, and I was there when we came up with the idea, but they had to really talk about, under these circumstances that we face right now, what's the best use of those resources. And the capacity of staff, as you know, the county has diminishing staff, and so their ability to participate has really lessened. So I just wanted you to know all of those pieces of this puzzle, and to tell you that nobody's sitting around saying we just think this is the swellest thing that ever could happen to us. It's a matter of trying to do the very best job that we can, bearing in mind some of the most vulnerable people, and trying to do something good for our whole community, and thinking of every single person in our community all the time. So I'm just putting that out to you.
I have next Bernadette, followed by Tim and Bob.
I will try and be as brief as possible.
Thank you.
My concern of saying that this is extending it for a limited period of time, with each extension, that limited period of time becomes an unlimited period of time just by the fact that it keeps getting extended, with really no true end in sight. My concern about it being at the location it is, with Buckley House so close in proximity, that these are people that have tried to finally turn their lives around, and now they're going to be released from Buckley House, and right across the street is going to be a lot of drugs and alcohol going on that they're desperately trying to stay away from. I'm afraid that they're just going to be sucked right back into it. So these limited resources that Buckley House has have now just been wasted because the person just can't even really get away from it. If truly this is really about continues to be about the 99%, then there's a lot more people besides the people that are there that should be supporting this, and there should be some private property owner that should come forward and say, I'm part of the 99%, come stay on my property, rather than requiring the public to do this. It seems that Occupy Eugene has become about homelessness, and I appreciate that the people in Occupy Eugene have seen the problem with homelessness and are trying to help those people. And I would hope that as Occupy Eugene is disbanded, that those people will take the energy that they have right now, and they will come up with a more permanent solution for the homelessness problem that we have in Eugene and the resources that are necessary, but this location, there is the unequal protection going on in the sense that they're building structures and they're not getting codes, building permits. I mean, I'm building something, I'm going down to the city constantly and paying money to be able to build something. I'm paying to have somebody come out and tell me it's right or it's wrong, and if it's not, I don't get to use my building, and yet these people have been allowed to build things with no building permits, to steal electricity, which is stealing from the taxpayers. And if it happened anyplace else, if you went and tapped the electricity at, the old Civic Stadium, the school district would be coming to you and saying, you can't use my electricity. And so it just seems to me that they want the 1% to follow the law, but they don't seem to really want to follow the laws as it applies to them. So I will be supporting this motion.
Point of order. The time that the meeting was extended has expired.
Thank you, Tara. I will entertain a motion to
Extend for 5 minutes so we can vote.
Oh, it'll be more than that.
Second.
We need about 10
Second.
minutes. Well, I'm sorry, we need about 10 minutes.
He made a motion.
I move to extend for 5 minutes so we can vote, because I want Tamara to be able to vote and she has to leave.
Second.
Second. Discussion on the motion to extend the meeting by 5 minutes.
I have a point of order, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman. I need the chair to rule. I just want to make sure, and this is a point of information, which may be a point of order. In the noticing of this meeting, we did not, I don't believe, notice that we were going to discuss and vote on taking a position on the homeless camp. And I wonder if Carter could enlighten us as to whether or not that would make it a legal motion, being as how it never received a public notice.
Question. Carter, do you have any?
I'm looking at
Our
other
bylaws.
parliamentarians.
Our bylaws say that we can.
I
add
opened,
items to the agenda.
I'm allowed to open and include an agenda item during the duration of the meeting.
Is that the chair's rule?
Oh, Tamara says it's in the bylaws.
I'm just asking at the chair. The chair ruling that this is that we can vote on this matter?
We have already voted on that, and that was part of the process, so.
Well, we haven't voted on any motion yet.
No, on the
It's now in the
idea of
agenda.
having the discussion, we made it part of it.
And my
So-
point of order is whether we can. So are you ruling we can? I'm appealing from your decision to the group.
Go ahead.
Much as I'm in favor of the motion, I just don't want to see us getting into a situation where we've approved something that we did not notice publicly and that we're going to get criticized for later on. So I'm going to appeal from your decision to the
Okay,
Commission.
so I have made a decision that 2/3 of you can vote to overrule my decision.
Okay.
So
This motion.
all of those to vote in favor of overruling my decision and allowing the conversation there for the vote on that.
Is there a discussion on that?
Yeah, sure, it's good.
I
We have a
agree
motion
with-
on the table, Chair.
There's a motion by Bob to overturn his ruling that we can vote on this. He says that there has to be 2/3 vote to overturn his
Point of
decision.
order, my motion to extend for 5 minutes was previously.
Yeah, but you
point of order takes
This is the point of
precedence for
order.
your motion.
have to get it.
Sorry.
No, he's not.
Chair, I'm sorry, can I just interject that I've been doing this job since 1985, and you can do this. You can vote on this motion, you can add this to your agenda, you're not doing anything illegal in the motion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that withdrawing that point of order motion, the appeal?
No, I'll withdraw my appeal from the chair. Chair's
Okay.
ruled, that's fine.
So now there's
Thank you, Bob.
Mike's.
I just needed that information.
That's
Thank you.
okay.
That's fine.
That's always to be safe than sorry.
Thank you, Mayor.
Now the
Mike's motion to extend for 5 minutes.
the motion, thank you. The motion is.
Which type took 5 minutes to decide.
Good point. It's taking 5 minutes to decide on whether.
Sorry.
It's okay.
So,
So anybody has any discussion on extending the meeting by 5 minutes so we can vote? Okay, all those in favor of extending the minutes by 5 minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
The motion, how many?
Or
No?
against.
So it still passes. Okay.
4? Did you get their hands again? I didn't see 4. I
Yeah,
saw
can you
3.
see them against? I
See,
have
3,
4, I
4.
think.
Jesse, Kidden, against Tim, and.
Those are the 4 against.
Yeah.
The rest are, Tamara, what was your vote?
4.
Four.
To to extend the. I
Okay,
voted in
okay,
favor.
what?
Okay.
All right, so we're gonna get right back to the queue.
So we called the question.
Yeah.
Wasn't that calling the question?
So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people on the queue.
My motion, point of order, was extend 5 minutes for the purpose of voting.
Yes. And we have another 5 people that still want to be in the queue before we vote.
Motion to call the question.
Right.
Move the previous question.
Second.
Cut off debate. I move the previous question, cut off debate and vote. That's the
Mike-
motion.
Mike just
Privileged motion.
seconded.
That takes
Discussion on the motion to cut off debate. Tim, Jesse.
No, wait, did you?
That's
Say
a
all in favor?
non-debate,
You do that?
that's,
Point of order.
that's a non-debatable.
Mr. Chair, my motion to extend for 5 minutes for the purpose of voting was
You didn't
strictly
say
because
for
one
the
of our
purpose.
members has to leave. And that was what I was trying to encourage was
I
an
know.
inclusive vote.
And you can't.
And so the longer we take this, the more it is likely that my motion will not be, that passed, will not be carried out.
I need to call the question to vote on the extending the 5 minutes.
No, we already voted on that.
Voted on that
We called the
8-4.
question, so there's no motion, there's no discussion on calling the question. We have to vote on Caitlin's motion.
Yep.
Great, let's vote on Kaylee's motion.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Can you restate, please?
say-
I wanted to-
The
I wanna know
motion
which
is
way I'm
to,
going, so I-
Recommend that.
excuse me, to recommend to the city council not to extend.
Motion is to stop debate. It is
His
not to
motion
vote
takes
on her
no
motion.
precedence.
The
That's
motion
what I was
is
trying to
cut
say,
off
but they're
debate.
saying no.
No, the first you
It's
have
a
to.
non-debatable motion. If you want to stop debate, it's
That's right.
2/3 of the vote.
Then you can vote on the question.
Right. So with 2/3 of the vote, there's no discussion and you move to the vote.
Correct.
So,
That's right, right. Caitlin?
And we're
Motion.
voting to cut off debate now.
Yes, and move the
All
motion.
those in favor of cutting off debate.
All those in favor of cutting off the discussion?
raise your
I
hands
know.
because we need to count.
Those in favor of cutting off the discussion, say aye. Aye.
I need hands. 'cause we got-
Raise hand.
Convenient to everybody who talked.
Those, well,
That's 2/3.
okay. So now, when I call the question,
Those that, was there anyone opposed?
I think I will assume, okay, those opposed,
Make sure we get that on
Okay.
the record. that
cutting off.
people
I was on
opposed.
the queue.
Okay.
Okay.
Motion precedence to cut
Yes.
off debate.
Sorry, I was wanting to do that same thing.
Now we vote on the motion.
Okay, motion is to recommend to the city council to not to extend the
December 15th.
December 15th. All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Keep your hands up, please.
Hands.
Those opposed, say aye.
Aye.
1, 2,
Even.
3, 4, 5, 6.
It's a tie.
So it doesn't pass.
Motion failed.
And with that, I'm gonna close the meeting. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna give you time to do a closing, because we already went over the time. Thank you, and have a good night.
So I'm the only one for the closing.